Dead.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the
No, that's right. I'd also recommend you guys get Stillwater by Chip Zdarsky.
Is it a boom book?
No, that's actually Image, but it's the next Chip Zdarsky. It's Image. It's coming out September 16th, called Stillwater.
I will, as we speak about it now, be completely unprofessional and DM my retailer.
That's all right. I'm taking my last bite of pizza before we really get started.
In my box, ? End of sentence. Okay, there's that. Okay, is it weird that I just have to double check to make sure that this is the 54th episode and not the 54th or not the 53rd? I'm 90% sure. Spark. You know what I just realized, like not more than 2 hours ago, that Three Jokers comes out next week?
I know.
It's crazy, man. And like now that I have a job, I am delighted to say I'm getting freaking all of the variants. Like
that's a lot of comic books, man. That's expensive.
Well, I'm getting 5. Yeah, I'm getting 5 covers. It is the 54th episode.
I mean, I'm a huge Fabok fan, and I love his art, but the thing that's preventing me from going all in on that, I think I'm just getting 1 cover each, is the fact that it's the Joker, and I'm so jokered out.
I know you don't like your Joker, but hear me out. This is like the first DC comic I'm excited. I've been excited for in a very, very long time.
That's fair.
And it's Jeff Johns, and it's Batman, and fortunately, because my retailer kind of is a sponsor of the show, I'm getting a pretty good discount on it. And also, worst comes to worst, if the book isn't as good as I think it's going to be, I can give one away on the show. At least there's something.
Yeah, the thing about it, and it's so often the case when things don't come out at the time that we think they're going to. When it was first announced, there was more buzz.
Yes.
And John's had, as you guys know, a little more power at that time editorially.
Yes.
And the fact that it took so long, like I'm perfectly fine with them doing projects this way where, hey, let's wait till the artist has the whole thing in the can before we release it. I'd rather that than when they release and then have to delay and it loses momentum that way.
Yeah.
But I just have a feeling because of it taking so long, it's going to come out. People are going to enjoy it. People are going to be talking about it. But once it's done, it's going to be one of those things that's forgotten for a while until they do some kind of hardcover super uber collection down the road. And who knows what the future of Black Label is. I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Yeah, that'll certainly be a part of the conversation. And on that, I think let's see. We'll get into a couple of these live chats, intro us up, and get right into the conversation. Because last time, Jace and I talked for about 15 minutes before we got to this point. We got to Helium 29 saying, "Good to see you, Comic Boom and Dark Knight." You forgot one crucial member of the conversation, Chief, but I won't fault you. I'm
all good. I'm the new guy. All good. Not worried.
But it's good to see you too, Helium. Thank you for showing up tonight. We have Samoki Dude saying, "Yo, how it be? It be good, man. Well, not for DC Comics. We're not gonna lie, but you know what? I'm shooting the shit with 2 of my friends, so I can't complain. What about you, gentlemen? How are you doing?"
Man, today was a day. Today was like super busy. I interviewed John McCrae earlier for his Kickstarter. So if any of you watching now or later, it'll be on this Friday Spotlight episode. I guess that would be the 14th, August 14th episode of the Comic Source. John McCrae just talking about his Kickstarter that's going on right now. It's already fully funded, so if you back it, you know you're going to get it. And he had a lot of cool things to say. It was really fun to talk to. So check it out.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to check that out. We got Aaron Vio saying, hey, driving home from work now. Well, I appreciate your due diligence of hopping on and saying, hey, drive safe, first of all. So if you have to shut us off, don't feel guilty about it. But I'm so glad to see you here, Aaron. We have friend of the channel, Nerdy Blurb TV, saying, yo, miss the comic duo, Boom and Dark Knight Nation. You good? COVID-free? I'll address that in 3 parts, as stated. The comic duo has never stopped, my friend. We've been hitting the airwaves almost every week, so looks like you got a little bit of back reading to do. But I'm good. I can't speak for my Canadian pal here, but what do you? What's your response, Boom?
I'm fantastic. Like I say, I have a lot of experience with Corona. Just it's the beer, not the virus, and so far that's still going strong, and that's how I intend to keep it.
Yeah. I would be upset if you were affiliated with the virus. I would be disappointed if you weren't affiliated with the beverage. So we're striking a mighty fine balance here. And yes, so far everybody on this stream is COVID free. So
yeah, speaking of beverages, what's everybody drinking? I've got my Starbucks double shot of energy.
I got my Starbucks Nitro cold brew.
Coors Slice, huh?
Yes, Coors Slice. Never heard. I thought I would try something different.
How is it?
So it's good. A little bit of lime and Coors. Can't complain.
There you go. There's a win. We got Taylor Pector joining us as well, saying, "Hey guys, what's up, Taylor? How you doing, man?" The one and only Joe's Geek Show, waiting for the wife, so leaving my obligatory thumbs up. Thank you so much. If you guys are excited for this conversation or dreading the aftermath of what is to come with DC Comics, either way, hit the like button down below. Tim Board, the one and only leader of the Hawk World online space, say, "Hey guys, looking forward to a hot discussion." We do try to keep it hot, man. I'm looking forward to it as well. Smoky dude.
Great Venditti meme that you put up.
That was a good one.
Yeah, about if I could write Hawkman and I could write like Robert Venditti, I would write Hawkman like Robert Venditti. I think we'd all agree that's a plan that would succeed, sir.
Yes, I would agree. And if you want a little slice of those Hawk World memes, you can look up Hawk World on pretty much any social media and find Tim. He's a great guy, curates a nice little community in the comic book space. So make sure you guys go check him out as well. Aaron Jones saying, "How's it going, guys?" It is good. It is good, man. Like I said, I am certainly lamenting what we are discussing about, but certainly not who I'm discussing it with. Let's see. Nerdy Blurb. He is backlogged for weeks. Been slacking. Glad to be here. Drink up, Boom. Woohoo! Uncanny George saying, "Hi, everyone. Looking forward to this discussion." Thank you, man. We are as well. Paul Baker giving us some very cordial salutations. Salutations to you as well, Paul. Tahilam coming in, correcting himself, saying, "Good to see you all." I appreciate it. I'm sure Jace appreciates it. And I think it's about time we get into it, gentlemen. What's going on, guys? Welcome to the 54th episode of Let's Talk Comics. I know, who let us do this for this long? Right? Where myself and other members of the comic book community discuss one of the many facets of the storytelling medium that is comics. Whether it be stories, creators, constructs, or adaptations, we hit it all. This week, I am rejoined by two of my comic book cohorts, all the way on... Oh, I'm pointing the wrong direction. This side is Jace, one of the foremost statesmen in the comic book online space, the Comic Source podcast. What's going on, Jace? How are you, brother?
I'm good. Like I said, not the best news, but you know what? Like, today's New Comic Book Day, and if anything, the number of great books and great stories out on the stands today gives me hope. Things change, it's corporate America, and we've got to roll with the punches, but the passion and the talent in the comic industry is unchanged by the announcements from earlier this week that we're going to talk about. And, comics are going to survive. They'll adapt, and we'll still get great stories. And yeah, so hang in there.
A little bit of that sweet Comic Source optimism. I love it. And of course, this would not be an apt episode of Let's Talk Comics without the one and only, the most explosive YouTuber in the comic book space, my pal, Comic Boom. Brother, it's good to see you. What's going on?
Man, I just, just sort of meandering, still contemplating the fallout from DC. Black Monday, Bloody Monday. It hasn't got has it got a nickname yet? It's Black Monday. What is it?
I've heard Black Monday. I've heard Bloodbath. I've heard Slaughter. But I think the one that's going to stick, it's going to be Bloodbath. In 78, we had the DC implosion. I think this one, the one that's going to stick, is going to be the DC Bloodbath of 2020. But I mean, first of all, you want to look 10 years down the road. Are any of us going to even want to think about anything that happened in 2020? We're just going to erase that year from our brains if possible.
Yeah, I hear that.
Good luck with that.
I've also been seeing that bloodbath hashtag being thrown around, so it seems like that's going to be the one that sticks. And obviously, we've prompted this conversation, and I think most of you who are weekly Wednesday warriors for comic books, now Tuesday if you buy exclusively DC and what have you, but DC has seen a massive wave of layoffs as a product of their completely inadequate parent company at&t bleeding out on the sidewalk, and hence pretty much all of the Warner Brothers properties that they had acquired are now facing some pretty brutal losses, including a number of figures in DC's editorial department, a number of their various executives from sales to collectibles to finances. And it is certainly going to have some big effects on the comic book industry. Now, today, we're obviously kind of give you guys the lowdown of what's happening, why we think this is happening, of course, and maybe speculate as to the aftermath of what DC Comics and potentially the comic book industry is going to look like a couple years from now, because DC being the number 2 publisher in the industry will certainly have a very, very large impact on what's moving forward. So before we get into the full slate of the conversation, I want to prompt you guys to please make sure you check out these 2 gentlemen using links in the description below, both fantastic comic book content creators with very unique voices. So if you don't check them out, I'll send you really angry emojis. Also, if you would, make sure to subscribe to my channel down below for more content like this, and of course, leave a like. That is one of the best ways to help out small channels like this. But with that out of the way, I feel like Jace would probably be the best at sort of summing up what the hell is going on with DC, just seeing your integration into the comic book industry, your sources, and just how thorough you kind of understand and have your fingers on the pulse. So, Jace, for the people at home that might not be aware or might tangentially be aware, what the hell is happening with DC Comics?
Okay, so there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I'm going to try to stick to the things that we think we know. And even the things that we think we know, I want to again stress, and I was talking to these 2 guys before we started broadcasting here, is that DC has never and probably will never comment on personnel moves. A lot of comic publishers, they release press releases. Hey, this person's been promoted, this person's left, this person's coming on, that kind of thing. DC has never done that. For whatever reason, they just never have. And now that they're part of a larger corporate conglomerate, I don't think they ever will. We never even got an official press release about Dan Didio leaving. So when news leaked on this last Monday that there was news of layoffs, the Twitterverse and social media verse just went crazy with all kinds of rampant speculation, and the word fired was thrown around, and we got those crazy theories that we get every time something like this happens, where Disney's going to buy DC and at&t is trying to sell Warner Brothers. So let's just all calm down and take a breath and try to stick to what we know. So from what we understand, as part of a larger group of layoffs all across Warner Brothers, up to 800 people is what we're hearing. A third of DC editorial has been laid off. So this is not creators, this is not writers and artists, this is editorial assistant editors and executives, vice presidents, and things of that nature. People in the publicity department and that sort of thing. Now, DC is quartered in Burbank, and it was they brought them over from New York City to be on the Warner Brothers campus because DC has always been kind of siloed. And even after they moved, it continued to be. And I think part of this layoff and getting rid of some of the old guard is Pamela Lyford looking to integrate a little more, get rid of the people that have championed the monthly book and the current model of comics, because that's all they've known and worked in, and bring DC a little closer to the rest of Warner Brothers for licensing and merchandising and all that. The bottom line is this is all driven by the almighty dollar. But as I said, DC is quartered in Burbank. That is in California. By California law, when you do mass layoffs, you have to give 60-day notice. I'm not a lawyer. I'm certainly not a labor lawyer. I haven't done any research on what constitutes a mass layoff. But 800 people apparently ticks that box. And so Warner Brothers had to give people at least 60 days notice. Or at&t, whoever you want to think about whoever called this shot. I'm sure it was an AT&T executive. So to their credit, they didn't give them 60 days. They gave them 90 days. So we're talking about not until December are any of these people going to be, out on the street. So it wasn't, hey, come in Monday, get fired. I've heard that so many people got fired. No, nobody got fired. To me, that's a different thing than being laid off. This is corporate restructuring. This isn't, punitive because people did things wrong or anything like that, or the comic sales were in the toilet and this is punishment, or even the crazy speculation from a certain group that I won't name that says, oh, we saw this Wonder Woman cover that's this weekend that, is SJW, and that's why they decided to fire a third of editorial. I'm like, are you kidding? That has nothing to do with it. So they gave them 90 days. I received emails today from people that were on everybody's list that are no longer supposed to be there today. I've received emails from them continuing to do their job, not to talk about anything, hey, I got laid off or whatever, but just people that work there that send out press releases and things that supposedly, hey, they're not there anymore. They got fired. No, I got emails from them today, business as usual. So nobody walked out the door on Monday, with the box under their hand and had packed up their desk. That's not what happened. They're giving them time. This isn't, a knee-jerk decision. And that goes to another point that I want to make is that this was always coming. Maybe the COVID pandemic moved the timeline around. It may even have delayed some of these decisions because everything was kind of on hold, but this was always coming. And I want to read something, and then I'll let you guys kind of react to what I've said so far. Mm-hmm. Jerry Conway, who I know and have the utmost respect for, has been around the industry forever, has worked as an editor at Marvel. He's written TV shows and movies. He understands the creative industry very, very well. He had this to say on Twitter on Tuesday, and I'm just going to read it verbatim. What happened at DC Comics yesterday was probably inevitable once Warner Media became a subsidiary of a tech company uninterested in creating new creative content and planning only to strip mine existing IP for streaming. It should have been clear when the incoming AT&T management told the management of the highly successful and profitable HBO that they needed to upend their corporate culture in order to feed the AT&T cable pipeline with continuous streaming content a la Netflix. It should have been clear when AT&T replaced the successful management team at HBO that AT&T didn't see the value in HBO's content, only value in HBO's brand. The content currently produced at DC Comics or DC Universe is of no interest to the tech bros of AT&T, only the brand. Publishing comics is a low profit margin business. The value lies in the IP and only the IP. Expect AT&T to do the absolute minimum necessary to keep the DC Comics brand alive for its IP value. Some of the decisions AT&T will make are probably long overdue for a business model that's been marginal for decades. This will be brutal and bloody. This time next year, I expect Marvel will own about 90% of the monthly comic market, in which case retail comic shops are done. DC Comics will probably publish reprints, a handful, dozens of new digital-only monthly series intended for graphic novel release. When comic book retail market collapses, Marvel too will have to turn to a digital monthly print graphic novel format for a reduced number of titles. It's simple economics. The business has relied too long on a fragile distribution model. COVID-19 and AT&T have broken it. And he goes on to kind of continue in that vein. I don't know that it's as bad as Jerry is saying. I don't know that we're going to see the end. Comics will adapt. I don't know that we'll see the end of retail comic shops, but I agree with him on a lot of what he says. AT&T bought DC. They bought Warner Brothers for the IP. And yes, DC is profitable. Yes, DC comics still sell. They still make money. But when you're talking about thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars to a company like AT&T that is $160 billion in debt, 10 grand means nothing. 10 grand a month means nothing. 120 grand a month in profit literally means nothing to them. So why go through the hassle? Why go through the editorial, monthly grind of putting out comics and go through the trouble for that measly return? They look over at Disney, they look over at Marvel, they see the success of the MCU, they see billions of dollars being brought in by these movies, and that's where they want to get to. and they already have the characters. They don't need new comic stories to come out. I've heard people say, oh, well, once they put out a certain number of movies, they don't have any IP to pull from. They own the characters. And you can't point at any comic book movie and say, that comic book movie pulls so directly from this comic that you've got to give credit to the comic writer for it. That doesn't happen. They already create the comic book movie stories from whole cloth. All they need is to own the character and have the rights to create the movie. The stories don't matter. The stories in comics don't matter. They already own the characters. So it's this IP farm argument that some people talk about. No, it doesn't need to be an IP farm anymore. They've already got the IP. They own the characters. They own the idea. They can make money. And if they can finally get it right, get these movies right, then yeah, maybe they can make a bunch of money. So the hassle for them, it's not worth it. And then when you talk about some of the more groundbreaking things and some of the better things that we've seen, and we'll touch on this more later, is the Black Label stuff. Day one, Pamela Lyford, Batwang lands on her desk. That's got to leave a bad taste in the mouth of somebody who couldn't care less about comics and doesn't want to put up with that. All she cares about is looking good for her bosses, which means she wants these things to make money. She comes from marketing. She comes from sales. She wants to sell pajamas and toys and what have you. So why have Black Label out there, which by its definition, when they announced it, hey, here's a label where continuity doesn't matter. We want creators to take risks and create new evergreen stories. You put the word risk in there, that's exactly antithetical to what Pamela Lyford wants. She doesn't want any risk. She doesn't want anything that can damage the brand. She wants to sell Underoos and Slurpees and Happy Meals and please her bosses. And so again, why go through the hassle of having monthly comics? They'll never go away completely, but expect at&t and in turn Warner Brothers to do the absolute bare minimum to keep this going. And it is my understanding, the one thing I took away from all the people I talked to the most that I really trust was that at the end of the day, the dictate did come down to cut costs. That came up, that came from on high. But in terms of who at DC got axed and what the DC model was going to be going forward, Pamela Lyford had total control of that. She had unilateral decision-making power of who stayed and who went and what the publishing model and publishing plan is going to be going forward. And that is terrifying. And it's exactly why we got what happened on Monday.
Yeah, it's a pretty rough situation, and you summed everything up really, really well. So I think it'd definitely be worth it to also kind of get into who was being fired so that we can understand how exactly DC Comics is going to be affected.
Laid off.
Sorry, indescript terms. So the big one, we bring up DC Black Label, the executive editor of DC Black Label, Mark Doyle, who honestly, in my opinion, was probably DC's best editor that they had. He started under the GOAT of all comic book editors, Karen Berger, in probably the last great era of Vertigo comics ever. He then moved on to the Bat Family titles during the beginning of the New 52, which, if you think about it, were consistently some of the best, if not just the best books coming out of the New 52, from obviously Scott Snyder's Batman run to Peter Tomasi and Patrick Gleason's brilliant Batman and Robin to Detective Comics. And then we move on further into his undertaking of the DC Black Label line, which up until Pamela Lyford seemed like it was literally going to be the best thing since sliced bread. And even post Pamela Lyford has a very much a laundry list of consistency throughout that line of books. We also saw the loss of Brian Cunningham, who I believe spent some time in Vertigo as well. But it's interesting because I don't know if either of you can speak a little bit more on Cunningham, because the only book that I have seen to have been edited by him within the last 5 years was Doomsday Clock. Am I missing anything? Do you guys know of any more recent titles Brian Cunningham might have had an effect on?
No, my understanding. So Brian, he's done great work in the past. I've met him a few times. A really talented editor, a lot of connections within the industry. He's been working in the comics field for a really, really long time. His wife's a writer. She works in the television realm. But Brian had sort of moved on to a more senior role as kind of an editor of editors, if you will. I think his title was senior story editor. So he was more like a liaison between Bob Harras and the other editors that were heads of the groups. Like if the Batman editor or the Superman editor or something like that, or a big crossover like Death Metal, the editors all get together with Brian, and he's kind of almost serving as an editor-in-chief to some extent, and then reporting to Bob Harras, who again, and I think we've talked about this before when Didio left. Harris was more the publisher in terms of what his day-to-day duties were, and Dan Didio was more the editor-in-chief because he wanted to be on the creative side. It's still backwards to me. So I almost think of Brian as like an assistant editor-in-chief with what his duties were, but he didn't have his hands in a lot of books directly, more as kind of an advisory role as well as a support role if anybody needed help, and he would kind of step in. But which is super nice guy, really talented, loves comics. So,
and what you bring up here too with that awkward relationship that DC has with the roles of editor-in-chief and publisher is going to be interesting, because now it kind of leaves us in question with everything going on. Are they going to be hiring a publisher looking for somebody to fulfill the traditional publisher role, or are they looking for a publisher that is going to fulfill a similar role to Dan DiDio? And same for editor-in-chief. You bring up another name, Bob Harras, a long-time comic book editor. He came from Marvel. He was DC's editor-in-chief. He just got let go. And we also are seeing Andy Corey, who seems to be very divisive in terms of him leaving. Amongst all of the editors that have seen their employment unfortunately go down the drain, it seems very split. Some people seem to be very happy about Corey leaving. Others are very disappointed. He shepherded sort of the last wave of Vertigo comics amongst a couple of other sort of projects from DC's various imprints, as far as I'm aware. He spent time on Aquaman during the end of the New 52. It doesn't seem like he's had much of a real pocket of the DC Comics publishing line, no?
Yeah, he kind of moved around a lot, helped out where necessary. I think probably the best book, the one that people might know him for best, that's currently coming out is Far Sector. He's editor on that book, which is a really fabulous book. So I've enjoyed some things that he's done, and I think there's some things that he's done that haven't really gelled for me. But with DC, man, there's always so much dysfunction. You never know what comes down from a higher editorial mandate that kind of handcuffs the editors. Unfortunately, it's interesting that Marvel doesn't have that problem, but it's almost like Marvel doesn't have enough editors to even actually do the work. So they're just worried about getting the books in on time over there. They don't have as much input as DC editors do. So yeah, you're right. I mean, I've seen it's interesting. The creators seem to love him, and a lot of his fellow editors seem to love him. But with fans, yeah, it seems to be split. Maybe even leaning toward a little bit of. I mean, he's the only other one that I've even seen any fans go, oh, glad he's gone, other than Bob Harras. But I've liked the majority of what he's done. I give him the benefit of the doubt on the stuff that I haven't liked. One other thing I did want to comment on, and again, we're trying to keep this to what we do know until we don't, until we go wild and crazy with the speculation. But I do want to mention this right now. And again, this is just rumor. I haven't heard anything from any of my sources, anybody that I know. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of this stuff, a lot of the rumors you're hearing and why you're hearing conflicting reports is because DC themselves, you could go to the highest person at DC right now below Pamela Lyford, and they don't even know, because things are so fluid. And the fact that none of these people are leaving until December, some of them that names we're naming now, it could change between now and then, because I've worked in the corporate world and things change all the time. It's constant. You'll hear one thing one day, this is what we've always wanted to do, and the next day, no, we never want. Like, look, I work for a restaurant company, and at one time we were told we will never sell gift cards, and then a year later, we got to get these gift cards rolled out. It's what we've always wanted to do. We have always wanted. That's corporate for you. That's just the way that it goes. But the rumor that I wanted to bring up is about bringing in an editor-in-chief. Again, we've heard that Marie Javins and Michelle Wells are being promoted to co-publishers. That hasn't been confirmed. I have absolutely no idea if that is true. It does make sense. Michelle Wells came from Disney, their young adult book market, which is a huge segment and can make money. And I'm sure it's where Lyford is looking at and salivating. So for her to actually, maybe for the first time ever, we'll have a comic book publisher who has experience and knows how to sell books. That could be really interesting and work for DC. And then you have Marie Javins as the co-publisher who has the comic book experience, knows about the direct market, has editorial experience, knows creators and such. So that could work, right? But again, you're naming them co-publishers, but what they're really doing is fulfilling that editor-in-chief role, according to these duties, if what we're hearing is true. And then the rumor is that DC is going to bring in somebody from esports to manage the line as a publisher, or as an editor-in-chief, rather. So you've got Javins and Wells as the co-publishers that are really doing the editor-in-chief job, and then you've got this esports manager as editor-in-chief managing the line. Managing the line, to me, that says publisher. So I don't know why DC can't get the titles right. It really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But it is interesting if it's true, because it may speak to, are they trying to capture the growing audience of esports because that's where the young market is, it's where the dollars are, or are they going to focus on digital and that's where they want? So again, kind of wild speculation, but I have heard it from a couple of people that's what they're hearing, but it's not substantiated at all. So
it's interesting, just because I am curious as to whether or not they're hiring a publisher, looking for that publisher to fulfill more of the traditional editor-in-chief role like Dio did, or whether or not, they are going to return back to the sort of norm of roles within the comic book publishing space. One thing, too, that I also think is worth mentioning that we do know of is that DC is also removing the title of co-publisher from Jim Lee, and he is now just Chief Creative Officer. And we haven't heard from Comic Boom in a little bit. So, Rocky, I'm curious, do you think DC is going to look to hire a publisher that takes a more hands-on creative role like Dan DiDio, or do you think they might sort of settle back into more traditional roles within the comic book publishing space?
No, they got rid of Dan DiDio for a reason. First, I want to caveat what I'm about to say, because I'm going to give a little bit of I'm not going to give pushback to what's been said so far, because we're all speculating, but I'm going to try to put a more positive spin on this, because I think I could be disastrously wrong, and I hope I'm not, but the best possible spin that I can put on this, based upon some of the information, as Jace has said, it's a little bit of speculation now. We think we know some things, but we're not sure. Things are subject to confirmation. But I will say this. Dan Didio was fired for a reason. The old model doesn't work, and it was dying anyway. And let's not kid ourselves that DC was perfect. I mean, Dark Knight, you and I have certainly complained about DC repeatedly. We could have an entire broadcast on the faults of DC editorially. So, I mean, nobody likes people getting laid off, especially during a pandemic. But I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that there wasn't some fat that needed to be trimmed. And quite frankly, that's what's happened, and it's terrible, and I certainly feel bad for them. But it is what it is. My most positive spin on this is that, in my view, I think that I just want to make a point about the e-director or the e-sport director that they might be hiring. People are saying, why on earth would you, what possible relationship would a guy who did esports have to do with comic books? What could he possibly know about comic book publishing? Here's my theory. He probably doesn't know a lot, but then Dan Didio didn't exactly know a lot when he was hired. Also, esports is extremely popular. They just to give you an example, the person who, the esport called Fortnite, you might have heard of it. The person that wins Fortnite every year wins $3 million, which is the same amount of money that the tennis player who wins Wimbledon every year wins. Esports are phenomenally popular. They're growing in popularity. That it's clear, if you look at all the people that are hired, if the rumors are true, it is clear that they're going toward focusing on the digital. They're focusing on movies and TV, and they are now pulling the comic book publishing IP under the umbrella of TV and movies, because they're utilizing the logic. Look, we're a huge corporation. Why are we having a separate division called comic book publishing that we're ignoring, and we're letting them to do whatever they want when some of our most successful IPs are in there? We want that under our control. Why should we why should we pay a publisher why should we have a different division and a different amount of bureaucracy and hire a whole slew of different editors for something that we could all have in-house under a movie and TV division? Now, I'm not sure how that they're going to structure it that way, but if I was a betting man, I'd say they probably are. And all this stuff, everything that they're doing right now makes a lot of sense from a money-making point of view. And I'm not going to jump on the bandwagon, although I have before. I am a hypocrite. and just criticize and say, oh, it's all about money. Well, of course it's all about money. We know that. But it just seems to me that, by the way, Marie Javins, you know what one of her first successes were at DC? Marie Javins, she spearheaded pushing for Injustice to be published as a comic book in addition to being a video game. And that's another connection to potential esports. She understands the other medium. And the other thing about the love of DC characters, we love our superheroes. I suggest, I'm a lifelong comic book reader, but maybe in the long run, it's sort of like it's like when your kids grow up and they leave home. You don't want them to grow up because you don't want them to leave home, right? To me, it's like, I've been reading Superman so long. I don't want them to leave DC, but maybe it's better for the characters that they are allowed to grow. Go to bookstores, DC Kids, young adult line. We for these characters, for these creatures of our folklore, as my buddy Spike always calls them, maybe in order to foster and grow, we need to loosen the reins a little bit and let the 21st century and the technology spread the joy of comic book characters, even if they're not in comic books anymore.
So let me give you a little bit of pushback, because this wouldn't be an episode of Let's Talk Comics if I didn't, right? So you make a very valid point that esports are very popular, but is being part of a creative narrative endeavor on an editorial level, like, don't you think that there are certainly some very different components to that? Because, I can say I was an excellent salesman when I worked retail for clothes and for shoes. I mean, I was top on the entire East Coast for the company. Do I think I could sell a car? No. Like, revoke my man card, because I don't really know shit about cars. So I'm not necessarily sure if, working in a field that is really popular computes to being able to, work in not only a totally different space, like publishing is its own beast, but also specifically being kind of the molding hands of a creative endeavor like comics. So how do you think, aside from esports being popular, how do you think this person hypothetically could fulfill the role?
Well, first of all, to be clear, I don't know the answer to that. However, I will say that they have to evolve or die. They have to do something different. And what I like about DC, and DC has a history of taking chances in the last 65 years. They still do business relatively the same way, but they're taking a huge chance. And to be blunt, esports is used to dealing with a customer base of hundreds of millions, as opposed to comic books that are dealing with a customer base of what, 100,000 people? I mean, it's embarrassing, the difference between the two. So if I was good, to me, this is, if I'm corporate, and even if I don't know a lot about comic books, but we all know the numbers. Yes, there's money in the print division, but it's diminishing returns over time, and they can still make their money in the bookstores. They're still going to make their money. I think they're going to move to a manga, they've been talking of a manga model. I think they're just going to change the way they package the books and the timing of it, and maybe go down to 20 or 30 titles a month or less, or whatever it might be. But I think that we need some new ideas. And I think this is less risky than a lot of people are thinking it is. And I don't know. Again, obviously I could be wrong, but I'm choosing to be optimistic here, and I think that Black Label is going to survive. I don't think it's going to be canceled, as some people are speculating. John Ridley, who was going to write Batman, the screenwriter, he has a Black Label coming out called The Other History of the DC Universe. It's coming out in November.
Finally, yeah.
Right, and so I think this talk of how Pamela Lefford, yes, she didn't like Batwang. Well, that doesn't mean she's going to completely destroy an entire Black Label line just because of one incident. I mean, she might, but I think that's taking a leap, and I would need more of an argument before I believe that. Beyond, that again, I'm just putting that out there. I just think that there's a lot supporting DC right now. Trade paperbacks are the lifeblood of comic books. Graphic novels are the lifeblood of comic books, not the floppies. There's talk about, well, you need floppies for trade paperbacks. No, you don't. You really don't. You can still have trade paperbacks without floppies. Comic books can still survive. We have a healthy, growing, independent market. There's still and also there's no guarantee that Marvel is going to follow suit and do what DC is doing. I'm not sure what Kevin Feige has planned. But is Kevin Feige going to interfere editorially with Marvel Comics? I don't know. He's probably going to wait and see. But I'll let Jace talk now.
I have more than just the Batwang. So Lyford went on record as saying she does not like imprints, and it was one of the first things she did when she took the job was she started getting rid of imprints, and now it's just the DC young adult. It's no longer Zoom and Ink. Wonder Comics imprint was not as promoted as it was. So it wouldn't, that's part of the reason why it wouldn't surprise me. So I kind of have three reasons why I think she might get rid of Black Label. And it's not to say that we won't still get stories that would have been Black Label stories, because you still want to let creators create. But I think it quietly might go away. It just won't be under the umbrella. It won't be a DC Black Label book. It'll just be a DC book. She doesn't like the imprints, Batwang, and again,
she likes money. She likes money. She likes things that make money, and it makes money, though, Jace. That's the only thing I'd throw in there. I mean, she can have her mind changed.
Yeah, yes, I agree. And I think, Rocky, I think that's why Black Label has survived so far. I think that's why she hasn't gotten rid of it yet. But I think she might take the advantage of a lot of the old guard is gone. Now you've gotten rid of two of Black Label's biggest champions in Mark Doyle and Andy Corey. So now's the chance for her to get rid of it. I hope not. And I hope that she can in some way embrace some risk to realize that, hey, this is a way to maybe make money down the line, not on comics, but Black Label books can be the books that translate to the big screen the best, because they are for a more mature audience. So hopefully that we can get there. To answer Dark Knight's question about what can an esports guy bring, I think it depends on the person. I mean, really all you need is somebody that has good leadership skills to come in and say they don't necessarily need to have publishing experience, because like Rocky said, Dan Didio didn't have that much practical experience. That can be learned, but you can't teach somebody to be a good leader. So whether or not you're bringing in an esports guy, because for all we know, maybe he loves comics and he just happens to work in the esports field. We don't know. There's too much that we don't know. But could they be bringing him in because esports is a growing field? Maybe. Could they be bringing him in because esports demographic is young and we're looking for younger readers? Maybe. There's too much we just don't know. So I won't say that just because it's an esports guy, it's the end of DC. It could work. It could not. And I kind of like echoing some of the optimism that Rocky said, and going back to some of the things Jerry Conway said. It has been a broken model for a really long time. And I'm divided about this in my heart. Like, I know a lot of these people personally, and I feel terrible that they've been laid off. And I think they have something to offer. But at the same time, I'm hopeful for the future, because we did need a change. There does need to be a seismic shift in the comic industry in terms of the way content is produced and distributed, and find some way to reach new readers, because the newsstand doesn't exist anymore. And that's the way that's how I got in. And that's how people used to get in. You'd see them at the grocery store or 7-Eleven or what have you. So that something definitely needs to change. And we hope that this change can be for the better and bring in new readers. The only last thing I'll add is, when you talk about bringing in an esports guy to handle a narrative creatively, well, I think going forward, yes, you are going to see a reduction in the line. There's no way around it because you simply don't have the people, the manpower to create the same amount of content you did before. But the other thing is, when you talk about lessening risk and fewer books, you're going to see continuity become less and less important, because continuity doesn't sell lunchboxes, and continuity, doesn't matter to cartoons or any of that other stuff. You know what I mean? When you start talking about the manga model or some kind of anthology model, again, continuity is not going to matter as much. All you care about is that people love the characters. And I think that can be okay. As long as we get good stories, DC will be okay. But I want to stress, so many people are saying this is the end of DC Comics. They're not going to make print comics anymore. And that is just patently false. There will always be DC print comics. They might not be in the form that they used to be, but print comics are not going away anytime in the next decade. It's just not going to happen.
See, I agree with you on that front. And before I get into that, I really kind of want to comment on both of what you said, because you bring up some great points, but I also think there are some sort of holes. So, well, let's kind of start with the fact that there is clearly a broken editorial and sales model in comics. I've talked to both of you at great lengths, both on and off the air, about how that is the case. In fact, I think, especially within this last year, I don't think I've gone a single episode of this show without mentioning how broken DC Comics editorial is. They needed overhaul. Shit, I offered to do it for them, whether or not it was successful or not. But there certainly needed to be a change, and whether or not this is a positive change or a negative change, we can only speculate. Where I have a big problem with an esports person taking an editorial or publishing role is that you it's not strictly sales. If this person were suddenly becoming a part of their marketing division or their sales, sure, that's totally fine. But as a publisher and or editor-in-chief, you need to have a know-how of the craft. Say what you want about Dan DiDio. Dan DiDio was a writer. He was a creative. He was an editor to some degree, I believe, beforehand. He knew how to drive narrative storytelling. Was he always successful? Absolutely not. But he did shepherd some really, really great ideas into DC Comics, aside from the fact that he was also a massive fan. So as an aspiring creative, I do get scared hearing about the potential of somebody in esports becoming, one of the sort of hands that modeled the creative side of the publishing division. Because aside from the fact that comics as a medium are kind of inherently different from others, most importantly, you do need to have some sort of know-how as to how to execute narrative storytelling and how to do it well if you're going to be part of an editorial or publishing-based department. Like I said, if this person in question is part of sales or marketing, I'll eat my words, because I get it. Comics need to change. Comic Boom brings up an excellent point that it has a rapidly growing audience and fan base. There's clearly money and eyes in that. So sure, but on the creative end, it does leave me quite shaken.
Well, let me ask you this. The publisher at Marvel Comics, from I think around 1990 up until 2018, 2017.
Sure.
Degree in economics, MBA. Didn't come from a creative field. Obviously, things weren't great in 1990. That Marvel went through bankruptcy or whatever, but shepherded it through. When they started to make their recovery and the MCU blew up and Disney bought them and whatever. So I would say that overall his tenure as a publisher was successful. And I'm talking about Dan Buckley. He didn't really have any creative kind of thing. Now I do agree that he worked with Marvel in I think it was the new product department before he became publisher, and he had several positions. So he may have picked up things and learned about the craft itself while there. But again, it's much more important for an editor-in-chief, I think, to have the creative chops. I don't know that it matters as much when you're a publisher, because that's more of the business side of things.
Yeah.
And again, I go back to the fact that if they're talking about bringing an esports guy to be editor-in-chief to manage the line, management of the line is the publisher. Editorial is the editor-in-chief, and DC just has always had those backwards. I don't know why.
And that's what gets me scared, though, is because we don't really know what DC Comics is expecting from either of those more executive positions within the publishing line. So that's where I'm really very much on shaky ground. I mean, DC, if you want to hire me as EIC or just an E, I'll take it. I'm here. And the last thing I kind of want to comment are we were talking about the potential longevity of Black Label, and boom, unfortunately, I'm going to have to agree with Jace here. I don't see a lot of life left in the Black Label line, aside from the fact that it seems that DC is promoting editorial with more experience in, I would say, more youth-oriented publishing lines. I mean, DC Black Label's biggest shepherd was Mark Doyle. And I don't quite think there's anybody with the same type of editorial style or the same type of editorial chops at DC to handle something like Black Label. And if we do have a Black Label, I guarantee you a year from now, it will be totally different. And I did want to comment on as well, how you had mentioned the return of John Ridley's Other History of the DC Universe being a potential positive indicator for Black Label. I can guarantee you the only reason they decided to rebirth that project is because of the massive civil unrest we've seen in the last 3 months. I can guarantee you that is the only reason they're publishing that book. And I'm not saying that to demean the book, because you guys can go back to the channel 2 years ago when I was talking about how freaking excited I was for it. So I'm not saying this out of like vehemence or malintent, but if this project has been dead in the water for almost 2 years now, what other reason would they have to bring it back? And hence, I don't think that's exactly what you're looking for to point at any potential longevity for DC's Black Label. With that being said, I definitely want to get into a couple of these live comments that have been piling up. I just want to let everybody know we're going to be skipping around through these because I can't read through every single one. If you want to guarantee your comment be read and addressed, feel free to use the Stream Elements tip link in the description below. Let's see. We have Taylor Pector, and he brings up a very good question. Could this be salary-based?
100%.
And if you look at it across the line, 2 of those 3 editors that have left DC Comics have been with them for a decade plus. Mark Doyle, Brian Cunningham have both been with them since the early 2000s. And I'll echo Jace's comment there. I do think salary is a big contender because I can pretty much promise you that the promotions that are rumored for both Marie Javins and for Jamie Rich, they may see a pay increase. I can guarantee you it's not what Mark Doyle and Brian Cunningham were making. So at&t bleeding out is very evident here, and whether or not they can save pennies, dimes, nickels, dollars, I think they're going to go for it.
And we're hearing a lot of names that are familiar to us in terms of editors, but there's other executives at DC, some people that have been there 25, 30, 35 years. These people make a good living. And when you talk about, getting rid of these people, yes, it's all salary based. That's why it's the senior editors that are going. From my understanding, from the people I've talked to, not a single associate editor or junior editor is being laid off, and they make pennies on the dollar compared to what these senior editors and these vice presidents, are making. So it's 100% salary based because, like Rocky was saying earlier, they're going to bring DC much closer into the Warner Brothers family. Pamela Lyford's going to have even more oversight, and they're going to share she's going to share the oversight of that with other Warner Brothers executives that are staying on and are being paid. And it's all about trimming the fat.
And also, I just want to point out that there is one division of Warner Brothers that never saw any layoffs, and that was Warner Media.
Yeah, video games.
So that's another clear sign as to where their priorities lie. Mm-hmm. And that is significant. And I do think that at the end, I think this is all geared toward focusing on the tech aspect, the streaming, the TV, the movie. And, they don't corporate redundancy corporations hate redundancy. If you can have one person do a job that 2 or 3 people can do, they're going to eliminate it. And that's what you see in the comic book division. They just see the comic book creators, as much as that might pain us as comic lovers to hear, they view them as redundancies and apparently quite replaceable.
That increases profitability. If you can have one person do the job of 2 or 3, then it's more money in your pocket. This is all about the dollar.
100%. And it's also worth noting here, Taylor Pector does remind us that AT&T also laid off about 6% of DC staff last year as well. So it seems that some of this, was, and you had alluded to this as well earlier, Jace, that a lot of this seems like it was inevitable. Yep. AT&T is definitely streaming more towards what they see as the future. And it doesn't hurt that. And it doesn't help their case that, again, you brought up the fact that they are, over $100 billion in debt?
$160 billion.
Which is
a lot. Some of that from the purchase of Warner Brothers, a lot of it from the purchase of DirecTV, which did not go well for them.
No.
And I saw somebody earlier in the chat asking, well, if they were in debt, why did they buy DC Comics? Keep in mind, they didn't buy DC Comics. They bought Warner Brothers. They bought HBO. They liked the IP. They liked the fact, hey, we're going to own these world, these characters that are known the world over, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and we can make money off the merchandising and the licensing of that. But we're also buying HBO. They're buying the brands.
Right.
And I also saw some people talking on social media, talking about, they're going to sell to Disney and whatever. It's like, no, that's never going to happen, because then you're killing the golden goose. That's the reason they bought Warner Brothers. It was part of it. Oh, well, when you're losing money, the first thing you do is you sell off IP to try to make up for the loss. That's true in business if you can sell the IP and return your company to profitability. That's what it's all about, right? But if AT&T turns around and sells Warner Brothers or just DC, that's a drop in the bucket, because you're not going to get $160 billion for that alone. So in that case, you're not going to do it. You're going to do what they're doing. You're going to streamline things, cut the fat, try to make it as profitable as possible to start paying down that debt. That's just facts. That's just business. That's just corporate life.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, there you go. Why did
my question to you guys is, and I know we're talking about DC, but I'm just dying to know both your opinions on this. The fact of the matter is that Disney has been hit. My understanding is that Disney's been hit harder than AT&T. Well, Disney owns Marvel, and Marvel, of course, you got sports, movies, TV, parks. Disney owns all that. Can we expect Disney now to maybe do a similar purge in Marvel Comics? And if you don't think that they're inclined to do that, I'd be interested to hear your reasons as to why you don't see it from happening at Marvel.
Well, a big part of it is that Disney makes a significantly more amount of profit than Warner Brothers makes per year. I mean, you look at the launch of Disney Plus, it is doing astounding numbers. I think it was like over 50 million subscriptions or something like that. And if you look at something like HBO Max's absolutely pitiful launch, I think that they had only seen an increase of 5% on top of their original HBO numbers, which only puts them at about 32 million. Now, mind you, this is a service that has existed at least digitally since the start of streaming. Aside from the fact that they failed to launch on the 2 largest streaming platforms on the face of the fucking planet, between the Amazon Fire TV and the Roku TV, they also just had a poor launch. They solicited content in their marketing that were taken off in less than 90 days after the launch. Aside from the fact of aside from a decent lack of original content, I just, Disney really has the world by the balls, just to put it plain and simply, on pretty much every front. You can even look at something like the Star Wars IP, which has seen diminishing returns in both of its criticism and its finances, still crossing $1 billion almost every time, with the exception of Han Solo, in its sleep. That's pretty astounding. So I think a big part of it is the fact that the mouse really does have control of the world right now. And I think that it's also obviously worth mentioning that Marvel does have majority share in the comic book industry right now in terms of, units and monetary profit. So, I don't really think that Disney is going to be put in a position where they're going to have to make such harsh changes to Marvel Comics, especially seeing how, we're coming up on a couple of fairly big events that I think are going to do well for Marvel. As much as I'm not a fan of this X of Swords or whatever the hell they're calling it, it's likely going to boost sales. And then you have Donnie Cates coming in with his King in Black, which is the culmination to his big, well received and well purchased Venom run. So, I think, is there a potential that Disney starts to really push some changes on Marvel Comics? Maybe, but we would, to my opinion, have to see some massive spikes in virus cases, and this whole shutdown would have to be prolonged for a significantly more time.
Yeah, so it's really interesting when you look at it. I don't think that anything that's going on currently with DC is going to affect Marvel that much. I think obviously the pandemic has hit Disney hard. We've heard, Disney's lost billions of dollars because of COVID-19. I do want to point out they haven't lost. I mean, they have lost money, but they haven't lost billions of dollars. You're just talking about a reduction in profits. Mm-hmm. Disney is much more diverse than at&t. at&t is a tech company. Disney's got, ESPN, so they've got sports, they've got the theme parks, they've got probably more licensing and merchandising and toys than anybody, and then they've got the film side of things. So they're a little more diverse there, so that they're better able to handle a reduction in revenue and weather the storm. Like I was saying earlier about DC, DC had a lot more editorial personnel. The reason I don't think that this pandemic is hitting Marvel as hard is because they cut the fat a long time ago during the bankruptcy years, and they never filled it back up. Even when Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti were running things, that was kind of the closest they got to being back to a I'll say a full hire state. But even then, they never completely filled all those roles. And with Ike Perlmutter there, notorious penny pincher to the point where you were digging through the trash for paper clips, and they literally took trash cans from under people's desks. So not everybody had a trash can, and there was just one trash can at the end of the hall because they didn't want to pay custodial to have to empty that many trash cans. If there was only one trash can, then the custodial person could finish quicker and you'd pay them less money. This was the Ike years, when they were coming out of bankruptcy. It was pinching pennies. And so that's why I think you won't see the same kind of impact at Marvel because of the pandemic. Now, that being said, I do feel like we've seen more of an immediate impact at Marvel than we did at DC. DC was the one that was pushing forward. Let's get books back out to retailers. Let's get retailers some way to make cash. Diamond's not going to distribute. Let me find an alternate distributor so we can start keeping things going and start getting money coming back in. Whereas Marvel was more, hey, pencils down, we're going to take a break. And they still haven't recovered. They're starting to now. But I mean, in June, there were weeks where there wasn't a single Marvel comic, out on the stands. I heard from Mark Waid today. He was on another podcast, and he was saying that he's got access to this repository of PDFs, which are upcoming comics from Marvel. And it's kind of like a shared box, probably like Dropbox or something like that. And you can go in there and you can see the script, and then you can see as the creators are starting to put art in there. Mm. He said there's 129 issues in there right now that are backlogged because Marvel had told people, hey, pencils down, don't create any art right now. Most of that stuff will end up coming out, but we know we've had some things canceled, Ghost Rider, Doctor Strange, and some other titles, wow. Strike Force, I think. Yeah. So I think the immediate impact of what the pandemic is doing was felt more strongly at Marvel, and they're starting to come out of it now. Where DC tried to kind of ignore it or put their best foot forward or try to fight through it, and it didn't really work. And now I think at&t or Pamela Leifert just decided, you know what? Now's the time to pull the trigger on the rest of this distasteful change. Yeah, we laid off 6 people when the merger first happened, and then we took the rest of this time as kind of an evaluation period. And now that we see where we are and we see where we want to go, this is what needs to happen. We're going to get rid of this many people. It's telling, I think, to me that they gave them that extra time, that extra 30 days. Hey, but it is December, and now they're going to start 2021. Okay, here's the fresh slate. Here's what we can do. When you talk about the accounting department, you can look at, hey, 2021 as a clean, different style, and it's going to be easy for them to compare. It'll be easy for Lyford to justify her decisions when you look at, okay, here was the profitability in 2020 and previous years, and here was 2021 cleanly going forward, and what have we done?
I think too, something that's worth mentioning here in what Taylor is questioning, and you brought it up earlier as well about Pamela Lyford's distaste for imprints. Could we also see the end of things of imprints that have been long going, and even imprints we've been promised? I mean, he questions Wonder Comics, Young Animal, and Jeff Johns' Killing Zone, which was solicited 3 years ago. Now, for my money, Young Animal has been coming to a very slow death for the last couple of years. I think the only book they've published in a long time was Far Sector, and even then, we had maybe seen one arc of Doom Patrol before then, and it had been about a year or so before we had seen anything else. Killing Zone, not going to happen. I can guarantee you it's not going to happen. Aside from the fact that it's been 3 years and we've got nothing, there's actually some breaking news that came out as we've been talking. Cyborg actor Ray Fisher is back on the offense, claiming that Jeff Johns made some thinly veiled threats to his career while filming the Justice League reshoots. Apparently, Ray Fisher claims that during shooting he wanted to bring Joss Whedon's sort of abuse of the cast and crew to the higher powers that be, and Jeff Johns had supposedly threatened him. Now, I don't want to discount this man's experience, but I am very much also not going to be the person to jump on the bandwagon and condemn Jeff Johns for something that we have absolutely no proof of. It's very convenient to me that Ray Fisher decided to bring all of this stuff out of the water years after this movie came out, after repeatedly complimenting both Jeff Johns and Joss Whedon. Now, whether I believe what pretty much everybody has said about Joss Whedon, it seems like the entire cast of the Justice League film is far more fond of Zack Snyder than they were of Joss Whedon. But regarding Jeff Johns, I don't know. Based on how I've seen his based on his reputation amongst fans, amongst other professionals, I don't think this is true. To be honest with you, this sounds like somebody who, and this is very much the case for Ray Fisher, with little to no Hollywood screen credits prior to Justice League, somebody who doesn't quite know how rough and how brash Hollywood is, being offended by what Hollywood is. Now, again, I'm not discrediting his complaints towards Joss Whedon and even towards Jeff Johns, because they may very well be true. But based on what I understand about Johns, and based on what I'd understand, based on how I'm interpreting his position being fresh into Hollywood, I think he perhaps had just gotten over offended. And with that being said, aside from the fact that Killing Zone has been fairly dead in the water for the last 3 years, and the fact that, publishing anything by Jeff Johns for DC Comics has been an absolute bear, along with the fact that we're getting, this I don't even know what to call it. We're getting this supposed news of Ray Fisher twice in the last 2 months. I don't think at&t really wants to deal with that potential PR nightmare. I don't know. What do you guys think? First of all, regarding Taylor Pector's question, what do you feel like the status of these imprints are? And B, do you think now that Ray Fisher has doubled down on his criticism of Jeff Johns, do you think it's potentially true what he's saying? And I want to start with Rocky here, because he hasn't gotten to get as much of a word in on the conversation so far. So what do you think in Comic Boom?
Well, you guys are a bundle of information, so when people know more about something than I do, I try to shut up, believe it or not. But to answer your question, I think it's just a bunch of PR nonsense, the whole Jeff Johns, Ray Jones thing. I don't tend to focus on it. And now, having said that, I don't know who to believe. And I will just say this. I do think that Jeff Johns is focusing on a Stargirl. I don't care what he says. His actions speak louder than his words. If he really cared about the production integrity of comic books and efficiency and expediency, then he would be more professional in how you don't take 2.5 years to get out Doomsday Clock. He doesn't care about comics as much as he says he does anymore. I mean, he loves it like I love it, but I also don't work in comics. If I worked in comics, I should do my job in comics. He doesn't do it anymore. So Jeff Johns has lost a lot. I love him as a creator and a writer, but as a professional, he's got a lot of growing up to do in the comic book field. Pick a field. TV or comics.
Let me give you a little bit of pushback on that. And I will 100% admit I may be showing a bias towards Johns, but what part of Jeff Johns' delay in production is DC Comics? I mean, he severed his executive ties by choice. He left. I'm sure DC Comics wasn't very happy about that. He shepherded one of the most consistent, kind of critical and financial period success in DC's recent history, and he decides to leave. What part of this is just DC looking at him and trying to put him in the doghouse?
You make a good point. Maybe I guess we don't actually know the answer to that question. We don't know what really went on behind the scenes, which I will fall back on my earlier point. I just don't really, since, let's be blunt, since all of us don't know the answers, if I have to pick an answer, I'll pick the answer that I think, that and by the way, Jeff Johns' delays existed even when he was working at DC. So that would be the first bit of evidence that I would say. So this is something that's been come up. Now, having said that, we're a little off topic. I mean, with respect to the lines, the Wonder Comic, Young Animal lines, the imprint lines, I like to think that we're still going to have some imprints, but if they're going to be eliminated, that's very interesting because it actually, in fact, perhaps some of the evidence would suggest you guys that your instincts and what you're saying is absolutely right, that maybe the imprint lines will be eliminated because they did talk about eliminating exclusivity of contracts. And if they're reviewing the exclusive contracts with Bendis, Abnett, Tom King, I mean, then, not that I don't put a lot of weight into exclusive contracts. I frankly don't give a crap. I don't think it necessarily affects the quality of the writing of in fact, I think an argument can be made that the quality of writing often is actually better when people don't have an exclusive contract, because when they don't have an exclusive contract, they're working better to get one. And in any event, I would not lose sleep. Obviously, none of us would lose sleep if we found out tomorrow that Bendis was a free agent. But it is what it is. I want to see the end of Wonder Comics. Wonder Comics is not a great line. Young Animal, it's just not successful. Money talks. I will say this: as much as we hate corporations and corporations only love money, how many times have you said, Dark Knight, that if you don't like a comic, don't buy it? Right? Well, nobody's buying Wonder Comics. Nobody's buying Young Animal. So shouldn't they be canceled? Is at&t the bad guy for saying we're going to stop these imprints that no one's buying, and we want to keep selling we want to sell to children because parents buy stuff for their kids? We want to continue DC Kids. We want to continue the young adult graphic novels because people are actually buying that stuff. Are they going to worry about pissing off 51-year-old white males like me who are upset that I won't be able to buy my weekly Venom? I don't think they care at the end of the day, or whatever. I said a Marvel comic, you know what I mean. But I don't know. I like imprints, but at the same time, you gotta. One of the things that DC's been bad at, and Marvel's terrible at it too, because I still say that comic books should sell a lot more than they have. Empire's a disaster. X of Swords, I think, is stupid. I think it's not bringing more people into comic books. The entire model is disastrous. It's still just as flawed as it ever will be. And, frankly, there probably should be a purge at Marvel. Something has to change. And I will give at&t credit. at&t is like the one sober guy that walks into a fraternity house on a Saturday night and everyone's drunk and they're the only sober ones and saying, what the hell are you guys doing? That's what they're doing. And they're cleaning the place up and saying, okay, first thing we're going to do is we're going to sober up. And once we sober up, we need to clean out half the house because most of you don't live here, or you shouldn't live here, because we only got 12 bedrooms upstairs and there's 700 of you in the house. So some of you got to go. That's what they're doing. And now once half the house is gone, they can say, okay, let's start from formula. Let's see what works and what doesn't. And we just happen to have guys that we have a guy from esports that comes from an industry that makes hundreds of millions of dollars, not hundreds of thousands or 100 million. And he's got some ideas here. And he deals with Fortnite as one example. And Fortnite is in publishing. Fortnite is in on the internet. Fortnite is the whole gambit. And I think there's a whole lot here to be positive for. And as far as the imprints, I don't want Black Label to be eliminated because I'm biased and I like it. But if you got to eliminate the imprints to get rid of some fat and try something different, somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think that when you start talking about exclusive contracts, and again, just because they get rid of the imprints doesn't mean the titles go away. You just take the imprint off, and everything can just be DC Comics. I think part of what my understanding of why Lifer doesn't like him is because she feels like it segments the line and in that way weakens it. Then you're competing against yourself. So just put everything in one bucket and that's fine. Yes, I agree with what Dark Knight said. We won't see Killzone as far as Jeff Johns and the Ray Fisher claims. I don't know. I don't exist in that world, in the TV movie world. I just don't. So I don't want to speculate. What you said, Knight, makes a lot of sense to me, that Fisher didn't have a lot of experience and maybe he's misreading a lot of what Jeff Johns has said. I've met Jeff in a professional way in terms of interviewing him multiple times, and I've hung out with Jeff in a non-professional way before. And he's always been absolutely amazing with me and a really cool, nice guy, very genuine and warm-hearted. So I find it hard to believe, but I can't speak to how Jeff was reacting to something Ray Fisher was saying on a movie set under those kind of stresses at the end of a long week. Maybe he had a bad day. I don't know. So I don't want to comment on that, but it doesn't, I'll just say it doesn't sound like the Jeff Johns that I know. So yeah, as far as Jeff stepping away from DC when he did in January 2019, I think it is telling that just a few weeks earlier, Diane Nelson, who had been on sabbatical, announced that she wasn't coming back from sabbatical and she was leaving DC. Jeff and Diane were really good friends. He started there when she was president, and they had a very close relationship, and she always championed him. And then she left and wasn't going to come back. And I know that the Jeff Johns Dan Didio relationship wasn't always the best. So Jeff himself at the time said, hey, I want to be on set and I want to be writing comics, and I don't want to be stuck dealing with corporate things, dealing with that. That's what he said publicly. And I have no reason to disbelieve him. That's where he wanted to be and what he wanted to get to. He did go to school to be a filmmaker. And I think that's, he kind of fell into comics. He loved comics growing up, and he was really successful at it. And I think at that point in his life, when he stepped away, he's like, look at my body of work in comics. I feel like I've accomplished everything I want to accomplish there. I haven't been nearly as successful on the film side of things. And so that's where I want to focus. And so I kind of agree with what Rocky said, that, I won't go so far as to say it wasn't professional, because I don't think he did it on purpose, but I think it was just all about priority. He put a priority on working on the TV and film stuff over getting the comic books out. And, it's unfortunate, and it is what it is. And, we just have to take it for what it is. But another thing I do find interesting, Didio's name coming up here, is that how much do you guys think that maybe it was, we know he got fired, but was it kind of like, I'm happy, I know what your plans are, Warner Brothers. I know what your plans are, Pamela Leifert. I know what's coming. And I don't want to be here when all these people that, I have championed and protected and taken bullets for over the last, 12, 15 years. I don't want to be here when they're all shown the door. So, you don't like my style. And we all know that Didio was a never ending champion of the monthly model and the floppy, and he would have died on that hill. So that might've been part of the reason they got rid of him when they did. And he might've been happy. I mean, anytime I hear anything bad happen at DC now, the first thought that pops into my head is, man, Dan's kicking back at home right now, drinking a beer going, thank God I'm not there anymore. You telling me I'm sure he was sad for everybody on Monday, but I guarantee there was a part of him that went, oh my God, I'm glad I don't have to deal with this right now.
So I'm going to comment on both the things you brought up regarding like the slow publishing of Jeff Johns' books. It is worth mentioning that the scripts for Three Jokers and Doomsday Clock were done years before either of those books were published or saw the end of the run. So I can't help but think that it's not Jeff Johns, delaying it. It could be the art. Both of the artists in the last two big projects that he's worked on are incredibly slow. And again, we there could be some things behind closed doors, but I don't really think 9 times out of 10 the writer is often to blame for the slowing down of the process.
It's one thing for the script. Maybe the plotting is done. It doesn't necessarily, or the scripting is done. Doesn't necessarily mean the dialogue is done.
Jeff Johns writes full script. Like he's come out and all of his collaborators have noted the fact that he writes full script, which includes dialogue in the first draft. So,
we also aren't privy to any editorial changes that need to be.
That is a big part. Regarding the other half of the conversation about Dan DiDio, I think he got fired. I can't help but think
that he 100% got fired, but it may have been one of those things like happy to be fired.
I think he certainly probably saw part of what's coming and hence why he had doubled down on his efforts to sort of pursue his ideals as to what DC Comics should be. Because I've always kind of seen Dan DiDio as this very relentless figure in the comic book industry, for better or for worse. He, for the most part, kind of gets at some point what he wants. So, I very much think that Dan DiDio was left against his will. Is he looking back on it now and maybe kicking back, stealing Comic Boom's Corona? Perhaps. Perhaps.
He's not stealing my Corona.
You do make a good point. I mean, it may have been he saw the writing on the wall and he was holding on tighter than ever and was being more tyrannical than ever, trying to consolidate his power base because he knew what was coming and wanted to try to delay it as long as possible.
I will say Dan DiDio was on a YouTube channel, Dan Shalin's YouTube channel. He had a long interview with Dan Shalin interviewed him. And Dan DiDio he's always very, very diplomatic. He never badmouthed anyone. Dan DiDio very rarely does that. And he did have one negative thing to say. He specifically said negative things about corporations in general. He never specifically said at&t, but you'd have to be an idiot not to know what he was talking about. And he said point blank that he said the one difference is that nobody will care. Nobody cares more about human being than human beings. Corporations don't. And there was obvious you could tell that there was some feelings behind those comments and some emotions that it was only his professionalism that he still maintains, even though he's no longer working for a corporation or a business, that, you could tell he probably has very strong opinions about how he was treated and how he was let go, how he was fired. Mm-hmm. And there's no question that I think certainly you nail on the head there, Jace. I mean, yes, I think it was clear. I'm sure in the very first meeting of Dan DiDio, when he met with the head of at&t, whoever that was at the time, that they immediately determined that this was a guy that fights for the little guy, that's going to fight for his creators. And they knew right away that that's the first guy that we got to fire. I mean, they could have fired Dan DiDio on Monday with the rest of them, but no, they fired him 2 months earlier or whatever it was. I mean, there's a reason for that. I mean, they could have, there's no reason why they couldn't have kept Dan DiDio and Jim Lee around both at the same time.
Well,
I mean, we all focused on GC generations this and generations that and whatever. Oh, nonsense. They could have put the hammer down on that. I think the whole thing was, I think they saw the writing on the wall that Dan Didio, he's used to being combative. Dan Didio is used to standing up for himself. He had 18 years or 17 years at DC. He's had his battles before. He had his blowouts with Jeff Johns, with Scott Snyder. That Scott Snyder is very vocal. Scott Snyder shares way too much information on his interviews, which is interesting. So, I mean, it's clear that Dan Didio was an editor. He did his job, but he was also at the same time, he would argue with you, Dan Didio, but he would also take a bullet for you if you believed it, if you had him on your side. And that was the type of guy that he was. So, we all have issues with Dan Didio and some of the editorial decisions he made or didn't make. But at the end of the day, there's no question that corporate at&t saw that he had to be the first to go, and he was.
Yeah. Now you make an interesting point, and I'd like to kind of put that in tandem with Taylor's comment here. He questions why DC needed co-publishers. It does seem kind of redundant, aside from the fact that it was never very clear what Jim Lee's influence was on the publishing side. And I think it might have been Taylor again who asks later, what exactly is the role of Chief Creative Officer? And as far as I understand, Chief Creative Officer kind of spearheads how the DC Comics IP interacts with all of their other media, whether it's merchandising, branding, licensing, toys, clothes, you name it, movies, film. As far as I understand, I believe that is pretty much the role of the Chief Creative Officer. Now, why DC had co-publishers to begin with, I also find interesting. And maybe, this kind of massive cleanup, and even prior with getting rid of Didio, maybe it was just this consolidation because, what was the point of having Jim Lee as publisher if, one, he was mostly fulfilling the role of a CCO, and two, even if he weren't, why two? Why do you need two people getting executive salaries when one person is really spearheading the publishing line, and at that, not really doing the job of an actual publisher? So that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Well, you kind of I look at it as, how in baseball, sometimes you'll see a general manager or any sport, it could be football, whatever, but you see a general manager of a team who puts together a team that eventually wins the championship. And the next year that general manager gets promoted to team president, but still does the same job. So you think about that title as just like an accolade. You know what I mean? I don't think that when Jim Lee first became co-publisher with Dan Didio, I don't think that his role really changed from what he was doing before. We really know that Dan was really always the publisher. And we say that in saying, like we've said so many times, that really what Dan was the editor-in-chief. He was the one making the creative decisions and kind of steering the line of where it was going to go. So they never needed co-publishers, but I think it was just a reward for Jim at first for what he had done with the DC Universe online game. He had worked in that field for a really long time, and he wore a lot of hats, and he still does. And when Johns did leave in January 2018, he did take on Chief Creative Officer role, which, like Dark Knight said, think of it as somebody who's in charge to be sure that the IP has consistency of tone across all different mediums. So to answer your question, they never needed co-publishers, but there's also, there's some division of labor, but it's also maybe the fact that Warner Brothers didn't want anybody to have too much power. But also when you talk about Dan Didio and his infectious love of comics and being the face of DC, that was a great role for him. But also Jim Lee could be the most famous comic creator out there these days. And so having him in that role and being able to constantly say, Jim Lee, co-publisher, there's cachet there. There's street cred for the comic fans because hey, Jim Lee, he was an artist. He came up, through the ranks and pulled himself up from nothing. And hey, there's some cred there. As far as why co-publishers now, I think what's interesting, and again, nobody has been named co-publisher. We haven't seen that name. We don't know. It's all speculation about this Javins Wells two-headed publisher continuing that trend of Didio and Lee. Like I was saying earlier, Wells came from the Disney book market, and so she understands that market really well. and then you have Javins, who understands the comic book and editorial side and has relationships with comic book. So again, it's division of labor, and their expertise lies in two different areas of the line. But I would also say, if that's the direction you're going with Javins and Michelle Wells as your co-publishers, guiding the line and guiding the creators, they're not co-publishers, they're co-editor-in-chiefs.
Yeah.
Can't stress that enough. But again, we don't know anything. It may be that they won't name a publisher, because you name a publisher, you've got to come with a raise, so maybe they'll just call them executive editors or what have you, and they won't have an editor-in-chief, or they won't have a publisher, because then they can pay them less.
That's true. You make a very, very good point. It's going to be interesting, again, especially because the sort of the ballpark for DC regarding their roles in the publishing process is kind of nebulous compared to their competition. Tim Board makes a comment here saying there's little doubt that DC needs help with their marketing and promotion of their books. It's been pretty lackadaisical. Yeah, I would agree. It seems like they pretty much have X amount of titles that they will really put that marketing money into, and the rest can kind of sink or swim, on the merits of the book or what have you. But in other ways, there are some books that DC very much goes out of their way to promote. Pretty much everything by Scott Snyder right now is given its own freaking motion trailer thing. Death Metal, Tom King
stuff. It's Batman. Yeah. It's Batman. Everything Batman's going to be promoted. And that's the sad part, is that I think that we're going to see more Batman-related stuff than ever before. They're going to double down on Batman. They're going to double down on probably more Superman stuff, obviously, but big-time Batman. And I think whoever was on Batman would benefit from it. It happened to be Snyder. Snyder's already said, let's not forget Snyder was talking about, Snyder says he's going to step back and let other writers take on a role. I wonder if Snyder even has a choice. True. Maybe Snyder's just saving face, because I don't know, Metal's selling well, but Snyder's stepping back. If DC is such a great place to work right now, and in other words, you've kept your job. He's higher up. Why wouldn't he want to stay at DC? Well, obviously, I would be curious to know what it's actually like to work at DC even before all these firings. And, is it going to be like working for Marvel now? And it's really interesting. The face of DC, let's not forget what's happened. Dan Didio, the one guy that wants the floppy, he wants to preserve the monthly comic book floppy on a month-to-month basis. He's fired. Within a month, DC says, screw you to Diamond. Granted, we're in the middle of a pandemic that aggravated things, but at&t gave those directives even in the face that it was going to further hurt the industry, further hurt comic shops. at&t does not care. They are culling the herd. And now 1/3, 800 editors gone. at&t clearly had this, that it was going to happen inevitably. The pandemic is making it happen faster. We are looking, this is the advent of change. In 2 years, we could absolutely be looking. A bold prediction is that in 2 years' time, DC is third or fourth in the marketplace for comic books, because these editors and creative types are going to be going somewhere, and they're going to be going to the competition, and they're going to, say goodbye to all the woke editors at Valiant and all these other places, because you're going to have people that actually know how to edit, because they're all on the unemployment lines now. So this is going to happen, because that's just a fact. It's going to happen.
If I had $1 billion, I'd start a comic book publisher tomorrow, and I would hire these guys, and I would hire you, Knight, as well, to be my editor-in-chief, and keep the trains running on time, and make sure that I would honestly, if DC's going to, fall down the hole of no continuity and not really a shared universe, the time is ripe for a new shared superhero universe to rise up from the ashes.
Absolutely.
And make a splash. And you've got a lot of talent out there that has a lot of network connections and a lot of talent on their speed dial. It could definitely work. So as far as Snyder stepping back, I kind of wondered about that myself when he made that decision. And I thought, well, I know he wants to work on some prose stuff. I know he has a couple of creator-owned books that he wants to get back to. So I kind of took it as that. But you know, like you said, Boom, now I kind of wonder if he knew this was coming, and all the people that had his back are now shown the door, and he's like, you know what? I don't need DC Comics needs me more than I need them. I can go make more money on one issue of Undiscovered Country than I can on an issue of Dark Metal or an issue of Batman or Last Night on Earth or whatever. I get a way bigger cut from doing an Image series. We know he has a project coming up with Francisco Francavilla that he's been teasing for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
So, you know, he's made his money at DC. He's worked on the characters he's wanted to work on and told the stories he wants to tell. So why put up with the corporate oversight and the risk of Pamela Lyford or whoever meddling in his stories and telling him, no, you can't do that with that character because we're about to sign a deal to make a line of toys with them. So they've got to look this way or that way, or you can't use them at all. Why put up with that crap, you know? So, yeah. I mean, he's made his money and he's got his stable of fans. Whether he's putting out good content anymore or not is up for debate, right, Dark Knight? But what he like for his, you know, from his perspective, you know, why put up with the headache?
Right. No, and I you know what, for as much as I have not been in love with Scott Snyder these last couple of years, you know, he's certainly earned a credibility and he certainly has an understanding of the inner workings of the industry. You know, I one of the things that I'm actually excited to talk about later on in this conversation is what we think some of these creators are going to do moving forward, because, you know, as we've talked about, DC's actually re-examining a lot of their exclusive contracts. Who do those exclusive contracts include? The likes of Scott Snyder, Tom King, everybody's favorite Brian Michael Bendis. So where do they go from there? Are some of them going to Marvel? Are some of them staying with DC freelance? More indie? Who knows? You know, there's a lot up in the air, and I think that's going to be an interesting question, especially with guys like Scott Snyder, who kind of have dipped their toes in a couple of different pools. So I mean, at the end of the day, you know, DC, you want a young, hungry editor to spearhead your line? Hi, how are you? I'll change my shirt if you want, whatever makes it easier for you.
You're literally selling your soul to the devil. You're going to go work for Pamela Lyford.
But I have DC tattoos, Pam. Come on, hit me up. I'm here. I'm a whore for your content. What can I say?
You'll have to cut off your dick and change your skin color too.
I'm not.
Sorry.
I'm not gonna comment. I'm gonna refrain.
I think that's in the fine print.
Perhaps. 100% perhaps. A couple things I do want to just, we had two of our incredible viewers contribute to the channel with a comment, so I did want to make sure we address those really quickly as well. But yeah, for the sake of me maintaining a career, I don't know if I'm necessarily going to comment on that. So with that being said, let's talk about the wonderful people watching the show. Tevye Smolka comments, does this mean Brian Michael Bendis will go bye-bye with this purge? Because personally, I am hoping with him gone, we bring back Super Sons and Family Superman and no more bullshit. I certainly think there's far more of a potential now. You know, Comic Boom brought up the very good point that Bendis's books are not selling like I would assume they thought he would. He's not doing well critically. And with them just generally reassessing their exclusive contracts, there's a very good chance that Bendis could be seeing the door. Gentlemen, specifically regarding Tevye Smolka's favorite writer, Brian Michael Bendis, where do you think he goes from here?
Well, I think that, first of all, that there was speculation that part of why Dan was shown the door was the incredibly massive contract that Bendis got. And obviously Dan was a big believer in him. And it's kind of like a free agent in a sport. You know, they make a massive contract for what they did the previous 5 years. Doesn't mean they're going to do that for the length of the contract. And we've seen that with Bendis. The quality of his I was never a Bendis fan, but I read some of his stuff. But there's no doubt the quality has gone down for whatever reason. We can speculate at that all day long. The thing about these contracts is they are kind of an albatross hanging around the neck of DC, especially Bendis's in particular. obviously none of us are privy to the language of the contracts, so we don't know. There's got to be some kind of outs in there where, if somebody hurts the brand or, goes across the street and does some work for Marvel. Because that's the thing I want to mention about these exclusive contracts. They're not really exclusive contracts, because just about every comic creator that has an exclusive contract still has the ability to go and do creator-owned work. And again, there's probably language in the contract that allows that. Basically, when you're saying exclusive, if you're exclusive to Marvel, you can't work at DC. If you're exclusive at DC, you can't work at Marvel. That's basically what it comes down to. So if there's any options in these contracts to extend the exclusivity, I would not expect them to be exercised. Whether or not at&t lawyers will be able to find some reasons to cancel some of these contracts, possible, but I think it's kind of unlikely. I think when you look at the people that have the exclusive contracts, they're veteran comic creators that know kind of which side their bread is buttered on, and they're not going to do something stupid so that they lose their perks. I mean, basically, when you talk about an exclusive contract, the benefits of it is you're actually an employee of the company. You're not freelance. So that comes with employee benefits, health benefits, things like that, and a steady paycheck, whether or not you are working on a title or not. So what might happen to Bendis? He's probably going to be able to live out the length of his contract. Whether or not they decide that they want him to keep creating books is a whole nother thing altogether. I don't know off the top of my head how bad the sales have been on things, but it wouldn't be unprecedented. Look at Chris Claremont's exclusive contract with Marvel. They're basically paying him not to go over and do things at DC. They don't give him a regular gig, but he's exclusive to Marvel and they're not even using him. So I would not expect in the future to see any more exclusive contracts. But I think the ones that they have will probably be honored. But I wouldn't expect to see any more or see any options exercised on any exclusive contracts going forward. And if we do see any exclusive contracts, I would expect them to be like bare bones and nowhere near the level of the money that Bendis was rumored to have gotten, or Snyder or Tom King. So
interesting. Boom. What do you think?
I just want to make the comment that, look, if I don't like a creator or a writer, then it's natural for me to say, hey, I want him fired. Get him off the book. But I got to tell you, if I'm brutally honest, a lot of writers that I've really liked over the years have low-selling comic books. Because guess what? I hate to say this to Tim, who's in the chat, I think, but I mean, Venditti is probably going to be removed off Hawkman. Hawkman doesn't exactly sell a lot of comic books. Sells less than Bendis' Superman, which blows my mind. I can't believe that. But, so what bothers me is the corporate mentality of canceling a book or getting rid of a writer, even if it's Bendis, and I don't like Bendis now. I don't like that mentality. So it's a double-edged sword. So I can sit here and I can bitch about Bendis, and I will because I can. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that I don't want, if I had to choose, I would rather have a mentality where you allow certain writers to explore some stories, give them an opportunity, and don't just, it's not all about sales all the time. And so, and I guess this is it's the same old story. You got to be careful when you talk about sales versus quality, because we all can name, look at Suicide Squad. Tom Taylor's Suicide Squad is arguably the best DC is putting out right now. And the sales of the first 5 issues weren't that particularly high at all. Nobody was talking about it, but it took 6-7 issues for suddenly people to realize that this is a great issue. My concern is, does at&t have the patience to understand in the comic book market, sometimes the best stories take time to find an audience?
And that's
the answer to that is no, because again, even if these, let's say that there was an increase, DC makes these changes. There's an increase in sales across the board for every single title of 25%. That revenue is still a drop in the bucket compared to the returns that at&t wants to see. They want billion-dollar movie properties and television shows that are, raking in the ad revenue. That's what they want. And like, to go back to what I said earlier, for them, the trouble and the hassle and the risk of negative publicity when, Wonder Woman shows a nipple or it's Green Lantern's turn to show the peenie, those and damage to the brand are not worth the headaches in their mind.
I think too, something worth noting is the fact that DC Comics, before being bought by at&t, fair, DC Comics before being bought up by AT&T was incredibly impatient with their line. I think it shows that, even a longtime comic book publisher with people in charge that know comic books didn't have the know-how or awareness to figure out, hey, eventually quality will sell books. I've used the Sandman example numerous times. That book about characters that mostly hadn't existed up until that point, or if they did, they were way, way, way back in the depths of DC Comics lore, started out selling Batman and Superman. So what does that say? Suicide Squad, strong book. We're starting to see the sales rise. Look at Injustice. Injustice, arguably, if you look at it as a whole, has been one of, if not the most successful comic book series DC Comics has had in the last decade. And that was built up by a series of quality perpetuated in longevity. So, I very much don't think that we're going to see a lot of sort of good inclinations coming from AT&T, especially regarding patience. I do also want to credit Aaron VO here, also contributing to the channel. Thank you so much, brother. You're so very generous. Just saying, keep it up, dude. As long as I have the platform and the incredible conversational partners, I'm glad to continue it, my friend. So thank you so much for contributing with both your thoughts and for directly supporting the channel that way. I appreciate you very much. There was also a comment here that I wanted to break into here, but I'm trying to. Oh, okay. Mark McKeever says, sorry I got here late. Sorry I got to your comment late, my friend. So don't worry about it. But it has the $5.8 billion that AT&T borrowed in March been mentioned. No, it hasn't. Was that does that have anything to do with maybe putting the capital together to launch HBO Max? Do either of you guys know about this supposed loan?
No, I wasn't aware that they had borrowed. I know they're like $160 billion in debt, but I wasn't aware that they had borrowed money that recently.
Well, Mark, if you're still in the chat and you have the background on this, feel free to clarify. I apologize for getting to this so late. Tim Board, Hawkworld, says, for too long, it has seemed like DC just throws stuff at the wall and stands back to see what will stick with minimal effort. Maybe these changes will wake them up. I agree. I agree with your sort of assessment of DC Comics editorial. That very much seems the case. As soon as, for example, the original Dark Knight's Death Metal series showed financial success, they went all in. They even hired freaking Marilyn Manson to create songs for their trailers. So, if that goes to tell you, once DC feels like something's going to stick, then they'll put the effort in. But until then, stuff is being thrown at the wall. And, as much as I think I've been a little bit more pessimistic in this conversation, I very much hope that this is the wake-up call. What do you guys think of Tim's assessment here?
Go ahead, Rocky.
Well, my comment is, first of all, the people that need to be woken up don't need to be woken up. They can keep sleeping because they can keep sleeping if they want, because at least after December, it doesn't matter if they wake up. They're not working for DC. And so now, as far as the writers are concerned, I mean, yeah, the quality of the writing clearly, I think, would need to maybe change. I mean, they have to, whether you call it all under one imprint, however you want to call it, the fact of the matter is that they need to have they have to have an editorial vision. They have to have maybe they have to have a unifying vision. And I still say that they had it with, whether it's Rebirth or whatever, or if it's one continuity, or they have to, one thing, here's the blessing in disguise. With AT&T is not afraid to make big decisions and say, this is what we're doing. That's what they got to do. Pama Lifford, or the esports guy, comes in and says, no, this is what we're doing. And he's going to give a directive. And if you got the best writers in the business saying, look, because if you only have 10 or 15 monthly titles, if they're going to put a kibosh on, I mean, they went down from 90 monthly titles, DC, to 52 monthly titles. And then the pandemic hits, And then who knows, maybe we're going to be down by 15 to 25 DC titles, monthly floppies in the next few years. We might have a change in the modeling system. We might go to the manga model. We might just have more trade paperbacks. Whatever it's going to be, they have to have a game plan. First, you have the game plan, then you get the story ideas. Because if I say to you, look, you're doing a trade paperback, you got 96 pages, and go tell me a Green Lantern story. Okay, well, you've got 96 pages to tell me a good story, and you better be good at it, because I'm not afraid to fire your ass, or I'm sorry, lay off. And that's what they have to do. And so I choose to be optimistic and share the optimism that, yeah, you got to light a fire under people's asses here. And, it is what it is, man. But it's got to be done.
True.
Yeah, and Mark just said in the chat, 5.5 billion in April borrowed for financial flexibility. I just Googled it. I saw the same thing. And we did, Mark, talk about kind of the impact of the $160 billion of debt that at&t is carrying because of what do they pay for 85 billion for Warner Brothers and I think 49 or 59 billion for DirecTV. So yeah, again, a lot of this massive layoffs has to do with the almighty dollar for sure. So it like Rocky just said, it kind of is what it is. And earlier on in the broadcast before you got here, I was talking about some of the observations that Jerry Conway made on Twitter, and I encourage you to go look up his Twitter. He has it pinned to the top of his feed and read about some of the things he was saying. The writing was on the wall from day one when at&t took over. As far as what Tim said and throwing things at the wall and trying to see what sticks, I agree with a lot of what Rocky just said. And if anything, DC's been even more rudderless since Didio left. I don't think they have a direction. And again, it goes back to something that Knight said earlier about having patience, and what Rocky said about having patience. It's like, hey, let's do this event. Oh, the sales aren't there right away. Okay, well, let's try this. You got to give time for word of mouth and for people to discover the books and the stories that are going to matter. So yeah, I agree with what you were saying, Tim. It's been rudderless for a long time. I would even go so far as to say the best thing DC has done since like 2008 was the Rebirth stuff. And we've seen time and time again, they've had other good initiatives that have kind of moved the needle, to borrow a term from across the street. They've never been able to maintain the momentum. I mean, look at the numbers on the New 52 relaunch, right? Like the books, issue 1, 2, 3 sold great, but then they couldn't maintain the quality. They couldn't, there was too many mistakes. And Didio himself came out and said, yeah, our mistake was we tried to do too much too fast. And you could even go back and say half-ass measure with Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985. Marv Wolfman back then wanted to restart everything with a new #1, and they didn't want to do it. And then they finally did it with New 52. So this isn't something new for DC, where they go half measures. And maybe, like Rocky was saying earlier, maybe this is the shakeup they need. As much as there's a human cost that we're all sorry about, maybe this is what needs to happen. We know that the comic book industry, in terms of a sales model and a retail model, is completely insane. Ordering something 2-3 months ahead of time before it's even been produced, it's insanity. It's insanity. And your retailers are paying, for their shipment to come in, whether that comic made it into the box or not, which is how Image damaged the industry so much in the 90s with their late books that comic shops were paying for, but didn't actually have the physical book to sell to recoup the money they were paying. So, there's a lot of problems with the industry. It's no surprise that, this bloodletting or bloodbath or slaughter, whatever you want to call it, is happening. And yeah, you're right, Tim. They have been throwing something at the wall for a long time. Nothing has been sticking. And maybe Pamela Leifert is, a year from now, I'll be calling her an angel instead of the devil. Maybe she's the savior of DC Comics. Who knows? You know what? And I know, fingers crossed. I hope so. I'll sit here and eat a big old shit burger if that's the case. I'd be happy to do it.
You heard it here, folks. Shit burger 2021.
There you go. Yeah, August 12th, 2021.
Yes, it's documented now. Taylor Pector brings up an interesting point. Isn't it also a coincidence that these people will be let go in December and death metal is going to end in January? And for those of you that for some reason don't know, death metal is going to be what is going to define the DC universe for the near and foreseeable future. What are you guys thinking about that? Is it a convenience? Jace brought up earlier that by California law, mass layoffs require a 60-day notice period, and yet DC happened to give them 90, or at&t. Now, could that just be out of sort of the ethics of making sure people have enough time to get back up on their feet? Or is it in tandem with the actual publishing line? There's a part of me that wants to say that it has nothing to do with death metal, strictly because the layoffs were not just contained within DC Comics. It's also prevalent to, the HBO branch as well, amongst other things in Warner Brothers. But I could very well be wrong. They may be striking while the iron's hot. What do you guys think?
I don't think it has anything to do with ethics. I think it has all to do with optics. Because like Rocky was saying earlier, this is a soulless corporation. They're not human beings. And I think with these massive layoffs, they want to say, look, we only have to give them 60. We're giving them 90. Look at how good we are. As opposed to giving them the bare minimum. I don't think it had anything to do with death metal. We know death metal is very, as opposed to Dark Knight metal, which was all front loaded with all the crossovers. Death metal is back loaded. Only one issue in June, one issue in July. I think there's 3 this month, then 5 next month, and 5 and 5 and 5. So all the heavy lifting is on the back end, but most of that stuff's already far down the pipeline where they could have afforded to get rid of people now if they were, legally able to do so. So I don't think it has anything to do with death metal. It has more to do with they wanted to look good. It's not going to be good PR, but because you are laying people off, but let's minimize and not look completely soulless.
I think what's also important is the transition. I mean, there's a reason why in when the president's elected in November, he's not in office until January 20th. There's a transitional period, and it's a hugely significant period when you lay off a third of your staff, and incidentally, it's not just death metal that was ending in January. A lot of the storylines for all the 50 titles for DC happen to be ending around that time as well. It's been a question mark what's going to happen in 2021, effective January. That's always been a question mark if you look at if you look at the past. So this, when hindsight's always 2020, but this it certainly in hindsight now it makes absolutely sense, the timing of this, and it really, because I don't think, if I'm giving at&t's perhaps some soul, they probably would have preferred not to have made this announcement a week before DC Fandom, for God's sakes, when most of the people speaking have pre-recorded their panels, and now they're going to be shown, and they're not even aware they were fired when the panels are eventually shown. But in any event, all these titles, DC titles, from the more obscure titles like the low printing Wonder Print line, or Wonder Comics line, to Red Hood and the Outlaws, and all those low selling comics, they're scheduled to end in the next few months. And so the real question is, what comes after? So they need time to clean out their desks. I mean, obviously they have the law they have to comply with, and that's neither here nor there. I openly wonder that if this is actually a gutting, just because they're required by law to give that period of time, it doesn't mean that they'll want them to stick around until December.
Yeah,
they might say, leave, we'll pay you, but please leave, right, so we can clean out so we can do renovations and clean it out, or move, do some own in-house housekeeping. So we just don't know until I have a feeling that Bleeding Cool is going to be inundated with, and Reddit's going to be inundated with a lot of rumors and over the next few.
And might some of those people not want to stay that long, they're going to be a lame duck. They might want to leave sooner. Hey, I got an offer to go across the street. Is it, can I leave early? That very well may be the case. But yeah, there's so much that we don't know. But again, like I said at the very, very beginning, these are corporate decisions, and corporate decisions should always be taken with a grain of salt, because some of them could change tomorrow. And some of the names we're hearing now, Pamela Lyford could decide, and based on what happens in the next couple months, you know what, I need to keep that person. maybe they're not even going to do the same job, but maybe I need to keep this person, and this other person that we thought was safe is gonna go. Or maybe a junior editor leaves and then they need somebody, or an assistant editor goes across the street because they have the offer and they feel more comfortable over there, based on these layoffs. I mean, there's just so much that we don't know, and we won't know. We won't know until late spring of next year. I will say this: if comic conventions can resume in the spring of next year, WonderCon, which I would always consider to be DC's home show, because it's the biggest convention that's closest to Burbank, and DC always has a huge amount of people there. Even if people from DC aren't necessarily obligated to be there, they're hanging around the booth, editors and employees and such, because it is their hometown show. WonderCon this year will be very interesting, especially in the bars after the convention floor is closed, what people are saying about how things have shaken out over the past 6 months since Black Monday.
That's true. That's very true. I'm interested.
You guys might have to make the trip if
just think of how many. I feel sorry for all those editors that were fired. Then the only way they're going to have to be able to get their job back is by sleeping with somebody. Or they're going to have to, there's going to think of all the abuse that's going to happen now at Comic Cons, all those editors. It's going to be an orgy, a literal orgy of people screwing for a job.
Supposedly those things go on. I've never seen them, but what do I know?
No comment. Trying to preserve my reputation. No comment. We have Professor Bill, Comic Book University, saying, "Hey, y'all, sorry it took me
Professor
to get to your comment. I'm absolutely horrible, but welcome to the show. I hope you're still here. Thank you for joining us, Bill." Let's see. I definitely want to run through some of these comments so we can get into the last leg of this conversation, because the three of us could keep talking for hours on end.
I got to go in about 15 minutes.
Okay, so we will bullet through. Taylor Pector asked, with the future downsizing of DC's line, could they possibly move towards a more TKO publishing model? And with that, I want to use that to signal into sort of the last leg of the conversation is, and what do we think the aftermath, the future of DC Comics is going to be like? And what Taylor brings up is very interesting, because TKO Publishing, for those of you that don't know, are an independent comic book publisher that keeps a very small, very exclusive line that publishes essentially for the trade. They use premium materials on the actual physical printing of the book, but they also have this really, really interesting model where you can order a slightly oversized graphic novel, or I'll use mine for illustration. You can buy 6-issue floppy sets in these cool display boxes, which are also slightly oversized. And again, you can purchase one full story arc at once. And TKO, to their credit, has also been going out of their way to get writers and artists that are well-renowned within the industry. Now, will they go towards TKO's sort of publishing strategy? I don't think so. Personally, would I like it? I would be in love with that. I said, I think on either my last stream briefly with Jace or with Rocky, the one prior, I am very much in love with publishing for the story, not for the monthly periodical. So if I need to pay, and don't get me wrong, you pay for this. I think for the 6-issue series, I paid $30, which is not cheap. But each one of these issues is oversized compared to a standard issue. The print quality is very high, and I get the full trade at once, aside from the fact that I can actually display floppies rather than throwing them in a long box, never to be seen again. So aside from the fact that they're going out of the way to curate strong talent on these books, the actual quality of the physical product is high. I'd be in, man. I'd be 100% in on DC moving towards something like what TKO is doing. Will they do it? I'm not so sure. I think Boom brings up an interesting sort of thing that people have been positing. Maybe DC might be leaning more towards the manga format. We might be getting trades or, larger, more premium style formatted issues, maybe even quarterly. But something as premium of a product as what TKO is doing, I don't think so. But You know, my two partners here might think otherwise. What are you guys feeling about that? Is TKO's sort of publishing strategy in the cards for DC Comics?
Go ahead, Rocky.
Well, I would love it if it was. I've always been, I've especially for the last year, I've been a huge proponent of that. I would love to have better packaging for comic books. I would much rather buy. I personally would rather spend $5 extra and get a hardcover than save $5 and buy the soft cover. That's just me now, and I think that. I think from my understanding of the numbers is that the bookstores are the fastest growing market. Bookstores, I think, overcame the direct sale market, I think, for the first time in 2019 for trade paperbacks and graphic novels. This is hugely significant. I think on the surface, I don't have a problem with AT&T's perceived strategy. By that, I mean what I think their strategy is, what I understand it, the idea of pushing, let's say 40 titles. They all come out digitally first, only have maybe 15 or 20 physical copies published monthly, but have like 40 at least published digitally. And then you got the digital line, and then maybe you'll have trade paperbacks of the first 6 digital issues, but they'll be better packaged, better marketed for the bookstores, primarily for the bookstores. In other words, I fully expect AT&T to cater exclusively more to the bookstores and the direct market too, but the direct market will be on the same playing field, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be. And if they can't compete, then you fold up shop, because at the end of the day, look, I'm good friends with my retailer of 25 years, man. He's a great guy, but my retailer will survive without comics. He already says he can. It's only 20% of his business anyway. He says he makes more money in trade paperbacks and graphic novels than he does on comic books. He can make it work. And so that model by TKO, I think that's a great model. They have shown that they can be successful at it. And there's no reason why somebody who's bigger and more powerful corporately, as DC is now with AT&T, why they can't make that work too.
You make an interesting point. What do you think, Jace?
So I think kind of goes back to something Rocky had said about them needing that transition period. I think right now, even Pamela Leifert herself doesn't know what the model is going to be. It's going to depend on who's this esports guy. Is he really going to come in to manage the line? And what's going to happen? They're going to use these next 3 months to kind of figure out what do we want to try first. And just because whatever they try first, just because it's first doesn't mean that's what they're going to stick with. There's a lot of speculation that they're going to go more digital. Well, you know, for the first time last year, 2019, we actually got to hear about digital numbers. Before that, publishers had kept the digital numbers very close to the vest, and we all assumed that digital was this huge number. So let me real quick read some numbers to you, and this information comes from Comicron, very respected site in the industry about what sales are, and also ICV2, Milton Grip. And so they got these numbers from BookScan, which is kind of the scanning the books with the ICB number, the barcode, and goes to what Boom was just talking about, bookstores being the biggest part of comic book sales. So last year for 2019, $1.21 billion in comic sales reported. Of that, bookstores accounted for $570 million in sales. This was the first time that bookstores had generated more revenue than the direct market. So direct market, we're talking about comic book retailers. Comic book retailers accounted for $525 million of that 1.21. So bookstores, 570 million, comic book stores, 525 million. Digital came in third at 90 million. So you're talking about a fraction of that 1.21. But I guarantee you that AT&T, being a tech company, sees the potential for growth there. And so it would not surprise me at all to see them double down on their digital stuff. We haven't talked at all about the DC Universe streaming app and how that's likely going away. In terms of just about everybody there was laid off as well. They've kept on bare bones. Well, you know what? Marvel Unlimited, right? A platform for just comics. DC Universe has the comics content built in. they've kept on, 2 or 3 people. It would probably take 1 full-time person and maybe 2 part-time people to keep the comic book library part of that going. Obviously, you have to charge less, and maybe you rebrand, maybe you don't. But I could easily see DC keeping that, because I've been told by sources, hey, DC Universe is not going away. DC Universe is not going away. Now, they've said that over and over and over, but we've seen all the shows move to other places, HBO Max or CW or what have you. So I wouldn't expect any more streaming content on there, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it stay around if DC does want to have their own channel and their own outlet to try to grow their digital sales. Yeah. Will they keep up with the Walmart books, the anthologies, and reprint things? Yes, probably. Will they publish digital stuff through Comixology and maybe the DC Universe app? Possibly. And then again, to Rocky's point, collect that stuff for the people that only want to read physical, collect it in trades or collect it quarterly or whatever you want to do, and sell that in the Barnes and Nobles, in the book market, at your local comic shop. I also agree that this is not the end of the monthly comic shop. There are plenty of comic shops out there now that don't. There's a huge one locally here in Phoenix. They don't even deal with new issues anymore. They got sick of dealing with Diamond, and they're all back issues now, and they're doing fine. So, all these people speculating online, this is the death of the comic shop, blah, blah, blah. No, it may force some to close, but comic shops retailers aren't going away wholesale. It's just not, it's not going to happen. What is going to happen, again, it's all speculation, but I would expect that AT&T is mandating that, hey, let's try more digital. Let's try to get in retail outlets that have a bigger footprint, like a Walmart. Because let's face it, if right now you want a comic, you go to a comic shop, you're overwhelmed. You don't know, what to do. And when at least this is the way it was when I was a kid, man, I'd have to beg my parents to take me to the comic shop, and they likely still wouldn't. It wasn't until I went over to my one cool uncle's house, once a month, who liked comics, that I could get him to take me to the comic shop, and I would like save up my allowance until that one weekend and splurge it there. So, I talked about it earlier, having lost the spinner rack and the newsstand. Digital really is the newsstand of the 20th century or 21st century. I've said it 100 times. So I could see that happening, and I could see them trying to increase their footprint in Walmarts and Targets and things like that. But again, I don't necessarily think that content would all necessarily need to be all new content, because if you're reaching new readers, then there's still stories that they've never seen. We know the Walmart giants right now do reprint stuff. And from Pamela Lyford's perspective, hey, I'm putting out content that's selling, and I don't have to pay the creators to create it. They've already been paid. So that's even more money in on the bottom line. So I don't think that the decisions have been made yet. I think they're still working it out. I don't think comic shops are going anywhere. I think you'll see an increase in digital, and I do think you'll see a substantial, probably at least half, if not more, a substantial reduction in the amount of monthly comics that DC puts out. And I hate to say it, but expect more Batman and more Harley and more Joker and less of things like Hawkman and Red Hood and the Outlaws and the things that are on the bottom of the list. Amethyst, forget about it. You're not going to see stuff like that. You're just not. It doesn't sell, and there's no reason for them to take any risks. And creatively, we might be entering kind of a darker period in terms of diversity. Hopefully we'll still get good stories. I trust the creators to continue to make good stories. But it might be that if they come up with some kind of anthology, we can still get, some of the B-list characters. And this is kind of a weird one. I've been fiending for a Blue Devil title for a few years now. That's completely out the window,
Did you read the last issue of Deceased? You got him for about 5 minutes.
No, I'm behind on Deceased. But did they barbecue? Did they chop off his head and barbecue him? By holding one of his horns over the fire.
Well, he's there for a nondescript period of time. I don't want to spoil it for you, but he's there.
Yeah. We don't want to spoil it for you, but you might want to,
read the title of the book.
Well, Tom King's killing everybody in that title. I expect no one to survive.
Tom Taylor.
Tom Taylor.
Tom
oh my God! Yeah.
Did you just feed into the meme?
I totally did. Totally fed into the meme.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and Tim Board brings up a proposal here. He says they need to find one super fan of each character, set them up as editors so fans can keep their collective minds in all the continuity and mess. Put the fans in charge. What could go wrong? Everything. Everything could go wrong. Because being an editor is much more than being a guardian of continuity. That is just one very small aspect of the career. Aside from the fact that one of the biggest roles an editor plays is as a conceptual story editor. They have to know storytelling. They have to know the formatting and how to best engage the comic book platform and the comic book medium to tell their story. First and foremost, though, they need to know the craft of storytelling. And by God, do most fans have absolutely no idea how to tell a story, much less specifically using the comic book medium. Aside from the fact that I don't know how you quantify a super fan either, because just because somebody has been reading a character for a long time doesn't mean they have any idea of who the character is at their soul. Jace and I went on for about 2 hours a couple days ago talking about how most people have no idea who Batman is and why he's special. And Batman is the most popular comic book character of all time. How do you quantify what superfan editor would take that position?
I think
because obviously for my money, it would be me. But for Jace's money, it might be him. For Comic Boom's money, it might be him. So
no, you go with a death match to determine the super fan. Last man standing.
Oh, I don't know, guys. I'm pretty young and springy. I might have you beat. But aside from that, Tim, first of all, like an editor in any sort of narrative storytelling medium has a massive job on their hands, which not only requires a knowledge and an efficacy within general publishing business, but also they need to have a very strong sort of understanding on conceptual storytelling, and especially with comics incorporating also a very, very prominent visual component to this storytelling, there is even more that needs to be understood. So for my money, with all due respect, I do not think this is a good idea in any way whatsoever. Now, where I will give you credit is that I believe that editors should be fans of the character 100%. But first and foremost, I would rather have an editor that knows how to perform the job of an editor than just to have a fan in charge. And as I always do, and as I have done in this conversation, I'll point at Karen Berger. She was not a comic book person, really, moving into, or at least not a big two superhero comic book person. She was more of a fan of European influence, of the European influence in the graphic novel space, and that's where she came at it from. And for my money, is arguably the greatest editor of all time. But I don't know. These two gentlemen might think something different. What are you guys feeling on that? Do they need super fans as editors, or are you more on my side thinking, well, it'd be nice if they were fans, but I would rather have a strong editorial presence over a fan?
My quick answer. I think Tim Board is. I think you gave a very detailed answer. I don't need to elaborate on it. You did a good enough job. I think Tim was just more in keeping, especially since he's a Hawkman fan. He's frustrated with when writers really screw up continuity, and a great deal. You mentioned that editors have many jobs. There are some editors that are really good at being good at all aspects of their jobs as an editor, except knowing the continuity of the characters. And that's just the harsh, sad reality. I remember coming out of the New 52. Actually, it was after 1 year later. It was after Infinite Crisis. There was 1 year later, and then they started it was a 1 year later. That was the wine line event 1 year later. And I remember that the editing was so bad that in the first issue of Hawkwoman, I remember Howard Chaykin was shocked to discover from readers that informed him that he screwed up majorly, because he thought that everyone in the town of St. Roch knew that Kendra was Hawkgirl. That's how badly he screwed up. He thought everyone knew he didn't think she had the identity was secret. Her identity was secret. The editors literally never told him that. That's actually a major faux pas. And I remember, and that's just an example of a faux pas. In any event, I share Tim's comments that, with continuity, you need editors that know continuity. But in the context of what we're talking about, I think we can all agree, or at least most of us, I'm sensing, are thinking that AT&T doesn't give a rat's butt about continuity moving forward.
Yeah, I think on the surface it sounds like a good idea, but I think in practicality it probably wouldn't work. I mean, we've already, and Dark Knight and I have talked about this at length on several of the recent broadcasts, how much harder it is to rein in talent these days. Talent has more power than it has in the past. You know, the pseudo celebrity comic fans or comic creators, it's a little tougher now to rein them in. And there's also just a lack of experience. There's a lack of good editors. I think people that are passionate about comics, a lot of times they want to be on the creative side. They want to write, they want to draw it. They don't want to edit it. So for whatever reason, you know, the editorial relationships aren't as strong as they used to be. And even when we talk about these senior editors that are leaving, we can't all agree who was a good editor and who wasn't. In terms of going back and looking in the past, we can all probably agree that Marv Wolfman, great editor. Who am I thinking of? Not Al Milgram, but Mark Grunwald, great editor. You know, you start talking about these people that did it for years and years and years, and that's all they did. You don't really see that anymore. You know, sure. Peter J. Tomasi is a good example of somebody who was a great editor, but wanted to be on the creative side, and now he's an excellent writer. So, yeah, I think we've already seen a decline in the quality of editors, and again, there's lots of reasons for it, and it's a whole nother broadcast in and of itself. I think you'd be taking another step down the ladder if you started bringing fans in. And again, I don't think it's because the fans would try to do a bad job. I don't think it's that a super fan wouldn't put their heart and soul into it. It's just they just don't have the experience and the understanding, and they might be able to gain that over time. But in the meantime, man, it's going to be a mess.
I agree.
Yeah. And I have a feeling Tim was kind of being a little facetious.
Yeah.
And all that. See, he even says, I guess I laid my. Now, all that being said, I bet you Tim would be a great editor for a Hawkman book because he knows.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. To be fair, Tim, sarcasm is very hard to read in text. So I apologize, but it brings up an interesting conversation for sure, because I can guarantee you that there are comic book fans that would actually think that they would be great editors, having no understanding of the craft of making a comic book. So, you know, I think it warranted a conversation. Sorry for laying on my criticism kind of thick, but I can be a bit dense at times.
I got to just interject. I do have to take off, guys. I have to take off. So thank you so much for having me on, Dark Knight. Jace, great having a discussion. I'll talk to you guys later.
All right. Catch you later, Boom. Well, and then there were two.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to be closing out in just a moment. I think, you know, Jason and I will probably move in briefly what we think might be the actual future of DC Comics. We talked a little bit more about what we were hoping, but you know, as many might quote, you don't always get what you want. So, you know, first of all, I want to prompt you guys to go check out Comic Boom. Link in the description below to his channel. Some of the most unique and expressive comic book reviews on the internet. Great guy. There's a reason I invite him to chat with me every single week. So if you haven't already, please make sure to go check him out. But with that being said, I think it is time that we get into where we actually legitimately think DC's future is kind of trending towards. And Jace, obviously you're the guest, so I'd like to get your perspective. We've talked, and I think most of us can agree that we would hope that DC would start moving more towards that European or just in general international model of telling more story, but less frequently, right? But do you think that's plausible? Do you think this is where DC under AT&T is going? Are they going in a totally separate direction? Do you think they're going to more fully utilize AT&T's digital infrastructure? What's DC Comics looking like 3 to 5 years from now?
Yeah, well, I think that, again, like I said earlier, you won't see print comics completely disappear. You know, Batman's always going to be there. Superman's always going to be there. You know, some of the other Justice League characters you may see, and we may see some kind of a quarterly Justice League book. So you get Wonder Woman or Flash or Green Lantern, and there's always going to be the possibility of limited series for something that takes off. But yeah, I think the future is digital. I think that at&t and Warner Brothers are going to look at that 90 million digital sales versus 525 million and say, hey, there's room for growth, and they very well may be correct in thinking that. I think they don't exactly know yet. I think it's going to be a feeling out process, but just based on the pure manpower of what it takes to put out 40 to 50 books a month, they don't have that manpower anymore. So you're just not going to see it. And the other aspect of digital that we haven't mentioned at all is the fact that you don't have to pay for printing. You don't have to pay for shipping. So again, the especially when you're talking about day and date release, where you're paying the same amount on Comixology or the DC app or what have you for a comic, they're pocketing more of that money. They don't have to share it with the distributor. I mean, if it's through Comixology, they do. I don't know what their deal is like there, but they're sharing much less of it with Comixology. They're pocketing way more. It's way more profitable for digital titles. So we're gonna see more digital from DC, and it may go away from, like I think right now they release a digital comic, or if they're not doing it currently, I know they've done it in the past, where 5 days a week. Like it's, every Monday it's this title, every Tuesday it's this title. I think like Tuesdays right now is when the Injustice Year Zero is coming out. Superman Man of Tomorrow by Robert Meditti was coming out on Mondays. So, it's a constant stream of content, and you'll probably see some advertising in realms where we haven't seen advertising before, especially esports. If we get this esport manager guy over, I could see them doing partnerships and sponsoring esports and that kind of thing. So I really do think, based on Pamela Lyford's experience with marketing and sales, that she's going to try to get the brand of DC out there more into the digital realm, and you'll see more marketing, but it's going to be generic marketing. It's not going to be, hey, Tom King's got a Rorschach book coming out, or hey, Scott Snyder's got this crazy Bat dinosaur book coming out. It's just going to be, hey, DC, come enjoy the characters, or come fly with Superman, or that sort of thing. And because of that, because they're going to be trying to reach new readers and trying to reach new markets, you're going to see the continuity and the barrier to entry and the complicated stories. You're going to see that stuff fall away. It's going to be more generic stories. And it's not that they can't be good stories or you can't enjoy them. I'll point to Cy Spurrier's recent maybe 4 issue arc in Justice League. It was kind of a bridge between what Robert Venditti did on the title for a couple of arcs, and now we're going into Justice League for 5 issues, being a tie-in to Death Metal, and this kind of bridged that. And it was the Justice League out in space, completely removed from everything going on with Year of the Villain and Death Metal and Leviathan Rising. It was completely separate from that. It could have been told at any time in DC's history, and it was a Justice League out there in space. It felt very classic. It felt very cosmic, and that's a story that could easily be picked up and read by anybody who hasn't ever read a DC comic or hasn't read a DC comic since 1982. So you're going to see more of those type of stories. And again, it makes it easier for the editorial, to the point that Rocky was making earlier about editors that need to be fans and understand the continuity 100%. Well, you don't if it's a story that doesn't tie into continuity at all. So you're going to see more of that type of content. What I worry about is that when you do that, it is part of the aspect of why they did the New 52 and why they did reboot after Flashpoint, is they were trying to remove that impression of a barrier to entry. I need to go back and read 800 issues of Superman or 900 issues of Batman or whatever to understand where the character is now. And people are intimidated by that, and it's confusing. So to be able to remove some of that would be a positive in terms of new readers. But what we saw when they did that, and Didio and Lee even admitted it was a mistake when they did that in the New 52, is you lost a lot of what the hardcore fans loved, which was the connections and the charm and the legacy characters that had passed the torch on from Barry to Wally, or Hal to Guy, or Jay to Barry, or any of that. The succession of Robins. You lost that. You lost that ownership that people felt like, well, Wally was my Flash, well, Barry was my Flash. You kind of lost the charm and what made DC special, and it's what made DC Rebirth so poignant, right? When it was the return of that. So I worry about them losing that again, but Lyford won't care, and maybe she shouldn't, because again, we're framing this as maybe this is what the comic industry needs, because let's face it, they can't limp along with a small readership that they have, and they continually keep bleeding us dry with variant covers and retailer exclusives and whatever, and they're pulling more and more out of the same hole, and it's not sustainable, because eventually we're going to age out. We're going to die, and if there's not a new generation coming up to replace us, then maybe it really could be the end of the comics industry. So I think more digital, and seeing DC in more places like Walmart, Target, but not necessarily recognizable as the DC that we've seen and come to love over the last 30 years with kind of tight story continuity and that sort of thing. Whether it's good or bad, we're not going to know that for a decade. And
Sure.
and it also will be, if they take this course, do they stay the course? Do they have the patience to stay the course and see if it works? If they continue to do what they've always done and pull the ripcord on these things, and keep pivoting, they're just going to keep circling the drain, unfortunately.
You make some very good points. It very much feels like the comic book industry, DC in particular, has been sort of in this awkward cycle of success and then remaking mistakes they've made in the past. And I think we've been more overweighted on the latter of them making mistakes in these recent years. And I very much agree with your assessment of kind of DC's legacy and what makes them important. And I think a lot of what you just said there is also what sets them apart from Marvel. Very much is that legacy, that rich wealth of characters to pick up where their predecessors had left off. And I agree. I think it is time that DC start to kind of pay off on the development of their legacy and move forward. One thing I will kind of give you pushback on is regarding DC moving. Sort of weighting more of their presence into the digital market. I have kind of two questions for you. And one of them starts with us kind of discussing the fact that it's been pretty much proven by the metrics that the audience for digital comics and the audience for physical comics are very, very different. Clearly, the people that are buying digital or that are buying physical are not going and also buying as much digital. So do you think that at&t is going to try to engage some of its background in the more of the digital space and trying to convince people to move to the digital format, considering there's far less overhead? And how do you see them sort of circumventing, those very die-hard physical print fans?
Well, I think that they're going that direction because of cost and because of profitability, and what they're hoping is that, okay, if we only release this stuff digitally, they're not going to have a choice. And if they really are hardcore fans, they're going to go to it. They're going to go and pick it up. And if we can get them reading it digitally, weekly or bi-weekly or whatever it is, then, and maybe they change their price model. Maybe you're talking about 99-cent digital comic once a week, which over the month adds up to $4, what you would pay for a physical. But oftentimes the digital comics, you're getting 20 to 30 pages, so you're actually getting a little more content, sort of, because the format's different. Maybe it's not the same number of panels that would be on a print page, but that's neither here nor there. They're still getting the same amount of money, but for those really diehard people that want to read it in physical but can't wait, so that now they're double dipping. They're buying it for, it's just 99 cents, so let me go ahead and buy the episode or issue or whatever you want to call it weekly for 99 cents, not realizing, hey, I just paid the full price of $4, when by the end of the month. But then when they collect it in trade for the people that want to have it in print, now they've effectively made the person pay for it twice.
It's true. I very much think there is a market of people in a very, very large market of people that at the end of the day would like comics published in more of a digestible way. And whether that is just getting larger chunks at a time with less frequency of the actual product's distribution, or if it's just smaller chunks more frequently,
Yeah.
I think either way, that very much points to the fact that as comic book fans, we just want more digestibility of this story. We want to not have to go back and reread something we read a freaking month ago to know what's going on, because I know I'm a culprit of that. I have done that many times, having no idea what happened the month previous and having to reread an entire issue. And now, maybe the 20 minutes I'm spending to read a single issue isn't a lot of time, but it's a busy world. I don't want to have to do that. Aside from the fact that selfishly, as a reviewer of comic books, it's really awkward when I have to review 1/5 of a story, and I'm only speculating on what can happen next. Will this be elaborated upon? Is this going to happen? Rather than speaking on the whole story and saying, well, this thing wasn't elaborated upon, or it was elaborated upon, it would make me feel more comfortable strictly in producing a more well-rounded and a more kind of grounded review on something. But as a fan, and as an aspiring creator, I would rather just be able to read a story, within a very, very kind of close frequency. So you make a very, very good point. And I would be interested to see whether or not DC is going to lean more towards the physical European model, or more towards we will publish episodes of series or issues digitally and then print for trade. I think that might be the most likely. Unfortunately, it's not the route I would like to go. But with this sort of onset of digital taking over, I very much think that we're going to start to see that shift. And the lack of overhead costs, like you brought up earlier, I'm sure is a huge contributor. The only thing I see as being a problem with that there are a lot of those old school comic book fans that will not budge. They are so very set in their ways that if comics do go almost completely to digital, they might stop. Now, one thing that will also be brought into question is, if comics were to do that, what will the pace be like? Will it be more stressful for a writer to have enough content to publish every week versus every month? Will that make it easier for them to pen? Because, when I've talked about what I wanted out of this and the fact that I think that you'll actually get more content if you space out the actual distribution of the product, because it gives them more time to sort of ruminate on what they're making, and it allows them to kind of flesh out their story in a longer sitting and therefore have more to show. Do you think this will affect the sort of creative output by taking their distribution to that type of model?
I think it'll be tougher, but I think that, if you're producing less titles, then you just kind of stagger. So people get more lead time, basically, and have to kind of set it up. And the reason I say that is because I look at the Webtoon model, where people put out episodes on Webtoon weekly, and I know some of those creators they kill themselves, and it's a weekly deadline, and it's up to them how many panels and how long the episodes are, how much they need to put out. I mean, obviously there's a minimum, and they work with their editors to determine that, and that's maybe different for different series. But when you love something and you're passionate and you want to get the story out and you want people to read it, there's that tendency to, hey, let's do more, let's do more, let's do more. And there is the danger of burnout. And some of the most popular Webtoon creators do take breaks from time to time because it is a grind. So yeah, I think it'll be tough, and it'll be tougher on those that have worked in the industry in terms of creators for a long time, for the longest time, because it's going to be so different for them, a different model. Instead of needing a script, once a month, they need one, once a week, and really only 5 days, and even less time that, I mean, talking about somebody else is drawing it, you may be doing a script, literally a page at a time and shuffling it over, which I think then hurts the quality of the book, because then you don't have the whole script together to be able to read it. So talking about more lead time, bigger breaks, it'll definitely be an adjustment period for the creators. And yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you. I'd rather see the European model of more anthology rather than waiting for a trade paperback or what have you with all of 10 or 12 issues of one story. I'd rather have 4 issues of of 3 different stories, let's say, which is a good, good chunk of story, or 5 issues, an arc, if you will, of 4 different ones rather than 4 arcs of the same. You know what I'm saying? So, but again, I think these are decisions that DC hasn't even necessarily made yet, and they're probably going to talk to everybody and get what opinions they can and see what will work for them, and try something. And if it doesn't work, they'll try something else. But hopefully when they try something, they try it for long enough to know whether or not it's going to work or not. That's going to be the catch. That
is the kicker, because DC, especially AT&T, more notably, is really chomping at the chain here to try to make up some of that debt. And I don't, DC definitely wasn't even in a position prior to, or at least they weren't kind of trending towards the notion of being patient and looking at things in the long run. And AT&T, I think, is less so. And that's what scares me, is that I don't think we'll ever truly know what system will work or not, because if there's no immediate gratification, I very much see AT&T switching direction. And the comic book industry has very much been like that for the last decade and a half. If they're looking for the speculation, the variant covers, the first appearances, they're trying to capitalize on those very, very, very short sales spikes over, maybe putting a Tom Taylor on a Suicide Squad book and watching the sales of that book consistently rise.
Well, I think that's a product of the way entertainment has changed now. Certainly in my lifetime, it's the instant gratification and watching things on YouTube and binging things on Netflix and such. So it's like these, and now that the comic book publishing, the big 2 are owned by these corporations, there's more pressure to perform, and there's not as much patience and, hey, let things unfold and give us some time to make something. It's like, no, look at all these other platforms and different types of media where, the feedback is constant and quick. And, that's not always the case when you talk about reading things. And the other aspect is we talk about, the diehard fans that may not want to go to all digital. And you have a comment up from Tevye there. I can see old school comic fans being pissed. Keep in mind, we're speculating about the future of DC. And to go back to something Jerry Conway said, where he expected Marvel to have 90% of the print market, within a couple of years' time. And that very well may be what will happen. You'll see the old school fans migrate to Image or Boom or Valiant or Aftershock or more Marvel titles and say, well, if DC's not going to give me what I want, which is print comics, then I just won't buy any of their stuff. I'll buy the Batman book and the Superman book, Detective in Action, and the rest of my stuff is going to be Marvel. I even said, I can't remember who, it might have been to you and Rocky, actually. I said, what, in a year from now, I'm going to be reading more Marvel than DC for the first time. I was like 13. I could very well see that happening. I mean, who knows? So take this all with a grain of salt, because it is, speculation, but print comics aren't going away, but some of the fans may migrate over to Marvel if DC is not giving them what they want.
That's true. The only slight addendum I'd add is that I don't think anybody's going to Valiant Comics, but I think the rest of what you mentioned.
You're probably right about that.
A possibility. And what, man, with the state of the comic book industry and myself slowly becoming more of a veteran comic book reader, I've been leaning a lot more towards indie. Like there's a 99.9% chance I drop every single X-Men book I'm buying and replace them with Image and Boom Studios and Dark Horse. And again, same with DC. I'm going to catch up on books. I'm probably going to drop them for indie titles. So that's certainly interesting. I very much see I don't think the indie market is going to skyrocket, but I very much see a more consistent future for the indie market for sure, especially as I think comic book creators are going to become increasingly more frustrated with models like DC and become way more inclined to tell their own stories, make more money for less work, own their characters. And one thing I do think is worth mentioning, sorry, you were going to say something.
I was going to say just the shoe's going to drop eventually as well, because we talk about a reduction in titles, and obviously all these layoffs were editorial and people that were on staff. But with the reduction in titles means they're not going to need as many creators, and you're not going to hear about a big layoff of creators because they're all freelancers. but you're just going to notice that, these creators, they're going to have to migrate to indie or self-publishing or do Kickstarters or Indiegogos or what have you if they want to keep making their own comics, because there's not going to be as many comic book jobs. There's not going to be as many jobs out there, not going to be as many titles that need to be written and drawn. And so you're going to see, eventually, you're going to see some fallout. You're going to see, creators struggling. And so where are they going to go? Well, they're going to go to indie, most likely. They can't get on at Marvel. And even if they can get on at Marvel, DC has the best page rates. So maybe they don't want to go to Marvel. Maybe, like we were saying earlier about Scott Snyder, you get a bigger piece of the pie when you own it yourself. And then there's every comic creator's dream of being the next Robert Kirkman and having a Walking Dead franchise that makes you a millionaire. And I talked earlier about the book market surpassing the direct market. Keep in mind that the number one selling comics and the number one comic creators in terms of making money, Raina Telgemeier for her stuff that she does that's super popular.
That's Scholastic.
And what's his name? Dave Pilkey or Pilecki, the guy that does Dogman. Mm-hmm. He has multiple graphic novels in the top 10 for 2010 for Dogman. These guys are millionaires. And so there's money to be made. $1.21 billion in comic sales last year. There's money to be made, but it's not at DC anymore. So you are going to see fallout. You're going to see creators have to pivot and be fluid and look at different models and different ways to stay in the industry if they want to keep making comics.
That's true. No, you make a very good point. And something too, I was just thinking about reading sort of all of our viewers' comments about not wanting to go to digital. We've talked at length before on many shows, including this one, about how, unfortunately, speculators are the backbone of comic book sales. And with the lack of, individual single issues, what happens to the speculator market? And I know it is this self-destructive loop for sure. I mean, I've condemned speculators numerous times as an aspiring creator as to how I think it kills quality, and I think it only provides a very temporary sales spike. But without regular collectible issues, there's nothing for speculators to speculate about. And I think it's less about like the amount of speculators as it is single speculators buying 15 to 20 to 30 copies of a single issue. Even my local retailer, was talking to me today about that really horrible Dark Knight's Death Metal one-shot that came out, about how people were speculating because of the Robin King origin or whatever, and how somebody actually at least was respectful enough to tell him by FOC to order him 10 freaking copies of that thing. And it's astounding. Imagine what happens when you have a couple hundred or a couple thousand guys doing that. And when that audience is gone because of a potential shift to the digital episodic format, what happens? That is a big component of sales, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think a lot of those guys are just gonna go away. They're gonna find something else to speculate on. And the other thing is you would see an increase in back issue prices, because those guys would, now there's no longer an ever expanding pool of print comics to keep choosing from that you can buy on the cheap. So they're gonna go back and let me find the hidden gems, or let me try to pick up something on the cheap that I can still flip. So yeah, you would see start seeing, and it would be gradual at first, but you would see an increase in cost in back issues, which then in turn might drive more people toward digital. The Marvel Unlimited platforms where you can go back and read the back catalog. And again, from the publisher's perspective, that's great, because that is content that has already been bought and paid for. So that's free money.
And to be honest, as somebody who consumes DC Universe and Marvel Unlimited, for the most part, I could go and just pay my subscription and read those series digitally. But as somebody who doesn't really consider themselves as much of a collector, when I really like a story, I do want to own the physical trade. I will go and purchase those really, really nice prestige collected editions. Hell, I have books on my shelf that I have multiple different formats of print for, strictly because I love them so much. I have 3 different copies of Watchmen. I have 3 different copies of Batman: The Long Halloween, 2 different copies of Hush. And, none of them are cheap. One that my Watchmen Absolute's $120. So, it goes to show, maybe they can find ways to take advantage of that. Who knows? I just, at the end of the day, I think there's a lot up in the air. And as much as I think I tend to lean more towards pessimism, I don't want to think about that as much. I'd like to hope that, just to be fair, I know that there is going to be a really rough transition period for DC Comics. You've said it. I very much echo that, but I can only hope that, AT&T will wise up enough to just know that they have no idea what the fuck they're doing, and maybe they'll go out and hire people that do. We saw that in the 90s. Marvel Comics plummeted. What did they do? They brought Quesada and Palmiotti in to toe the line. Hopefully, you see things like that happen. Do I think it's going to happen? No. But you know what? Hope is hope. You know what I'm saying? So, we're kind of teetering here on 3 hours of this conversation, and obviously there's a lot to be said. But I do very much want to thank everybody who watched us live. We did have a great audience tonight who really participated and added so much to this conversation. So I want to thank you guys for being the lifeblood of this show and putting Jace, Boom, and I in a situation where we can sit and talk about this very kind of small piece of news in the world for 3 hours. So you guys are the best. Thank you so much. And if you did enjoy it, I would appreciate you taking that little step further to click the like button down below and to subscribe to my channel. Now, if you know what's good for you, you will also use the links in the description below to check out Jace's podcast, The Comic Source, which you can find on a couple of different platforms, pretty much any major podcast or audio platform on the internet. I follow him on Spotify, so you can do that in the same way that I did. So with that being said, Jace, what do these folks have to look forward to on the Comic Source podcast? I know you said you just finished up an interview today, but you've always got stuff rolling out. So let us know the lowdown. What we got coming?
Yeah, that John McCrae interview that I mentioned earlier will be out on Friday. We've got the continuing Thanos reading order, where we're looking at the history of Thanos chronologically. So we started with the Jason Aaron Thanos Rising series. So that comes out Saturday. We've got another episode of Superman Sunday coming out on Sunday. Obviously, today, New Comic Book Day. We had our New Comic Wednesday episode. So X-Men Tuesdays, always a lot of great content, always a lot of great interviews. We interviewed Christopher Cantwell, who has an Iron Man series that's launching in September, next month. If you're not familiar, Christopher is from the world of TV. He was the showrunner for *Halt and Catch Fire*. So even though I mostly just talk about comics, I'm such a fan of that show, we had to talk a little *Halt and Catch Fire* as well. I have a couple other creator interviews that are coming up pretty soon. Probably going to have Jimmy Palmiotti on pretty soon, as well as a couple of artists. I don't want to throw out any names because I want to wait till it's confirmed. But the best thing you can do is follow me on Twitter, where I'm always talking to creators on there that I know and joking around, and you can kind of dip into our conversations. And we all miss each other, man. We're so used to seeing each other at conventions around the country throughout the year, and that's been taken away from us this year, the hashtag comics family. So follow me on there. That's the best place to find out when I've got new episodes dropping, and find out, when I talk to creators and news bits. And I try to stay away from the politics for the most part. So if you're worried about that, but it does leak in there every once in a while. So forewarned is forearmed. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on as always, Dark Knight. It's a great conversation. And again, if I can stress anything, it's support your local comic shop. Tell them the books you want. Continue to buy books, because now more than ever, DC needs it, obviously. And take everything you hear with a grain of salt. And even the things we've said here tonight, nothing is set in stone. In corporate America, things change rapidly. And some of the people that are laid off may not actually end up leaving, and some of the people that supposedly are staying may not end up staying. We just don't know. There's too much up in the air. But time will tell. We'll see.
That's very true. I'm definitely keeping my eyes peeled for that Palmiotti interview. Hopefully we'll get to see him elaborate a little bit on his response to your desire to have him become publisher of DC Comics, I'd love to hear a little bit more of that. So
I don't know that we're planning on talking about that too much, but I imagine it'll come up at some point. So.
Yeah, a man can only hope. And if you guys want to know what that's all about, make sure to go follow Jace the Comic Source at the Comic Source on Twitter, and as well as myself and Comic Boom, where you can check out that conversation, as well as the episode on Jace's podcast, where we went more into depth at potentials for DC Comics publishers way back when Dan DiDio got the boot. It was a really, really great episode, a lot to listen to. So if you have a long drive or you just need something to chill out and get some ear pleasure from, that would be it. We got a comment from Mark McKeever saying, great show. I'll watch the first part I missed so I can feel smarter. You know what, man? If that's what makes you feel smarter, I will appreciate it wholeheartedly. He also gives a shout out from the 623 area code. Thank you so much, my friend. If those of you watching really did enjoy this video, we would definitely appreciate a like. But one of the best ways and the easiest ways to help all of us out and to build the community is to share this content with friends. Simply hitting that share button, bringing it into or in front of the eyes of somebody that might enjoy it, or somebody you think would become a positive contribution to the conversation, would be absolutely huge. So if you would, for those of you that are left here tonight, please share this video with a friend, share this with a group of people. It is a huge help. Otherwise, if you want some goods, we have Dark Knight Nation and all of the affiliated merchandise in our shop using the link in the description below. Money goes back to the channel to produce content like this, and you also get a little bit back. We are producing Let's Talk Comics, this specific show's merch, including collaborative merchandise with myself and Comic Boom. Maybe we'll get more guests to join on and just have some really, really dope shirts. Who knows? But with all of that out of the way, speaking of corporate America, me plugging all my shit, I want to thank everybody so much for watching. Thank you to Jace for being a huge part of this conversation and for just sitting down and shooting the shit, and obviously to Comic Boom, the one and only, for again continuing to be part of this conversation, and Mark McKeever, hashtag race to 500 subs. We're getting there. So if you wouldn't mind showing the support and love you have been in the comment section with the share button and subscribe button, I would super appreciate it. A lot of love to you guys. Thank you so much for watching. And this has been another great episode of Let's Talk Comics. See you next week.
Take care, guys.